Okay. Tria, do you want to get started?
Yeah, for sure. So we're going to go over the logic game question types today. And this part, we're going to go over each question type. And it would be great when I ask if any of you want to participate or like take a guess at what the answer could be. That'd be awesome. So this can be more interactive if you guys want. But just to start, why learn the logic game question types? There's only a few question types on the logic game section. I don't know if you guys have noticed repetition, but there's really only like a few question types, so it's possible to learn all of them and to understand what each of them is asking for and like what that implies and like what is likely to be the correct answer, what is unlikely to be the correct answer for each question type. Overall, it's better to rely on intuition because you probably know what most questions are asking for in general. I'm not trying to like dissect everything to further like to confuse you guys, but this is just in case if you're ever reviewing alone and you want more guidance, notes about different question types can be really helpful. Because maybe for whatever reason, you're thinking about that question in the wrong way, or you're not looking for the right thing when you're looking for the answer, and maybe that's why you're getting tripped up. And another reason why it's good to know about the different question types is you want to feel confident about when you can cross answers. Sorry. So you can feel confident about when you cross answers out. Does that make sense? Okay, cool.
Yeah.
There are going to be like notes to take for this section, but like I'll make a copy of this PowerPoint and send it out in the email. So if you don't have enough time to write everything, that's perfectly fine.
So for the question types, most questions, like over half of them, will just look like the first two that are listed there. There could be a local rule before them, but there doesn't have to be. So they could say something like if, you know, F is going second or something like that, or maybe it doesn't have a local rule and it just applies to every possible combination for the game. But most questions just ask which of the following must be or could be true or false. Does that sound familiar um, in general?
Yes.
Yeah. And then the other version of that is when they ask each of the following could be true or false except. But so that's what most questions really look like. And then the less common questions that you have are one of them they ask, okay, the like it can be completely determined like where everyone goes if, and then you have to figure out which of the possible answers ends up determining all of the other spots. There's questions where they ask how many or for a minimum or a maximum. And then you have rule substitution questions. And it's good to know how to do those less common questions because I think those are the ones that are sometimes harder to translate, if that makes sense, and to figure out exactly what they're asking for and what they're looking for. So for this question, do any of you want to translate it for me? What is this asking for? When they say like, which of the following must be true? What
Like
is it?
it has to be true. Like nothing else can go.
Exactly. Yep. Yeah, pretty much. It must be true for every single combination that's relevant to what they're asking about, right? If there's a local rule, it would be all of the relevant combinations for that local rule. If there's not a local rule, you're looking at all of the combinations that are possible, essentially. It must be true for every single possible combination that could happen. What is the answer likely to be? I know that question's kind of confusing if you don't know what the possible answer could look like, but basically, like what it's likely to be somewhat restrictive and it's probably not a floater. And just to explain that a little bit more, if something must be true, does it make sense that it's probably not a floater? Because does anyone want to try and explain why that makes sense?
If it's a floater, it could go anywhere. So that would probably be under that'd probably be the answer to something that could be true because it doesn't have to be in one spot.
Exactly. It would be weird if a floater has to be restricted in one spot, right? That goes against the definition of a floater. And that's why I wrote there, unless the floater is being restricted through a local rule, then it makes sense that, okay, like this floater could be restricted and it must be true that it has to go somewhere because it's no longer acting as a floater. But in general, the answer is likely to be somewhat restrictive. So it's probably going to be something you have rules about, maybe even multiple rules about.
Sorry,
And
can you define local rule versus just a regular rule?
for sure, for sure. A local rule is when they just add something in for a question.
Gotcha, thanks.
So some questions will be like, if F comes after G, then which of the following could be true?
Got
And
it.
even though that's not a rule that you originally had, you have to consider that as a rule for that question. And that's what a local rule is.
Thanks.
A lot of people refer to those as local rules versus global rules, and global rules would be the rules that apply everywhere, right? Those are the rules that the game originally gave you. When would you cross out an answer? Does anyone want to take a stab at that?
For a must be true question, you would cross out an answer if it violates any of the rules.
Yeah, if it violates any of the rules, or if it doesn't show up in a combination, right?
Oh,
If
yes.
you can find even one combination that breaks what that answer choice is saying, then it's no longer must be true, right? Does that make sense? And I think the next bullet point, oh yeah, and just to know what that means, even if even one combination doesn't follow the answer choice, right? That means it could be or must be false. Like if it could be or must be false, it's definitely not your answer. And for this question type, it's easier to cross out answers, but harder to find the correct answer. And the reason why is because if you have previous combinations that you can look at, right, it's very easy to cross out answers because you can see what doesn't have to be true, right? You can, if something is not true for every combination that you have, you can just cross that out. Versus, is it easy to know what all of your relevant combinations are? Is it easy to know what every single combination is? Not really, right? And the correct answer has to hold true for every single combination. And so sometimes, unless you're brute forcing, right, this doesn't really matter. If you're brute forcing, you're just going through every single answer option. But if you're just thinking about the question in general, it's pretty hard to just find the correct answer. Does that make sense? Okay, cool. And then, I'm sorry, I don't remember off the top of my head. Oh yeah, to brute force. So how would you brute force this? You would want to see if each answer choice could be false. And maybe Akarshana wants to talk about her process for brute forcing this question type.
Yeah. So I'm very big on brute forcing, as you've probably figured out by now. So for a must be true question, say they give me a local rule and they say, if G is in spot 3, what must be true? So the first thing I do is draw up my diagram. So to say there's 5 spots and G is in spot 3 for this specific diagram, or for this specific question. And they answer choice A says M must be in spot 2. Well, I'm going to say, okay, well, I'm going to put M somewhere else. Maybe I put M in spot 4 or 1 or 5, and I'm going to see if I can put spot M, like put M in a different spot and see if it still works out. And if it still works out, it doesn't have to be true that M is in spot 2. So I'm going to try and prove everything wrong until one sticks out to me, and I can't do anything but put it in the one spot that absolutely says it has to be in. So maybe I get to an answer choice that says R has to be in spot 1, and I say, okay, well, I'm going to put R in a different spot. And it turns out that if I put it in 2, 4, or 5, it's never going to work. So it has to be in spot 1. Does that make sense?
Is it enough? I have a quick question for you guys. If the local rule is, or if the answer choice is saying like M goes in 2, right? M must go in 2. If you put M in 4 and it doesn't end up working out, is that enough to cross out M as an answer choice? Any thoughts? Is that enough? Go ahead.
I was just gonna say my initial thought was yes, only because it has to go in spot 2, but I don't know if that's, I don't think that's right.
I mean, that's my thought. Is that if the initial rule is it has to go in spot 2, then yeah.
Yep, exactly. You're right. You can put it, you don't have to check every single place that M can go outside of 2. You can just pick one and it should be enough. Does that make sense? Yeah.
I think brute forcing for this gets easier and easier the more you do it, because at this point, like, I'm not gonna sit here and test like M in like spot 2, 3, and 4 or whatever. Like I'm gotten to a point where you'll get to a point where you're intuitive enough to pick like, okay, well, M is probably gonna work if I put it out in this spot, and I'm just gonna try it out. And then at that point, you can see if it works or not, and then move on, because you're gonna build up that skill by doing this more and more, and you're gonna get to a point where you can pick one specific area to put it in, and it's all you have to test instead of testing like 3 different combinations for one question. Here's another question for you. If I had, say this was like the third or fourth question, and in an earlier question, I don't think this is the same question that Shreya asked, but say in an earlier question, there was an answer choice where G was in the third spot and M was in the fifth spot. Do you have to test out that M is in the second spot if you already had a different combination where G was in the third spot?
Wait, can you say that again, Akarshna? If G is in the third spot and M is in the fifth spot?
So let's say, and like question 2, the right answer to it gave you a diagram like this. I don't know. And now your fourth question is asking you if G is in the third spot, what has to be true? Do you have to check these answer choices, or can you use this diagram to prove what has to be true?
Wouldn't you test it to see if those other ones can go other places?
Okay, but what if like the answer choices for the must be true said like, I don't know, R is in 3. Do you have to test that?
No.
No, because you already see that R can be in 2, so that's not right. What if it said F has to be in 1?
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I see what you're saying. You don't have to test it because you
Right.
know F being one. So you said after you already diagrammed it, then if you're looking at it,
Right.
what you already
This
have.
is like question 4, but you had a diagram that introduces local rule
Okay.
earlier, then you can
Mhm.
check past it. So what happens is sometimes you can cross out 2 answer choices and then you're stuck with like 2 or 3 where it's like, okay, now I have to brute force and see like if it works. So you can see that A and B don't work out, but what if like C said T is in 1 and S is in 4? Now you're like, oh, those things could be true. Now I have to check which ones are true every single time.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I wrote that part where it says under cross out and answer if, where I wrote it's easier to cross out answers for this question type. If you keep track of your previous combinations, it's very easy to cross out answers for this question type. Sometimes one combination can help you cross out like three different answers, right? It's easy to cross out answers for this question type. So that's just a good thing to know because when you're thinking about, okay, what's the most efficient way to solve this? Sometimes it could literally be just writing 2 combinations and crossing a bunch of stuff out. And then you only have 2 things that you have to like brute force at that point or whatever. Yeah. Does that make sense? Do you guys have any questions about this general question type? One last thing that I would say is strategy wise, I know for global must be true questions, right, where there's no local rule introduced, sometimes people skip them and come back to them at the end when they have more combinations, because then they don't have to do any work for them. Does that make sense?
I like that. I didn't think of doing that.
The only thing I would say there is sometimes the questions are set up in a way where with some questions you make certain inferences early on. And isn't it good to know what must be true
Yeah.
earlier on? It kind of is, right? So that's the only thing I would say. Like if a question's really killing your time for whatever reason and it's a must be true question, like sure, you can skip it and come back to it at the end and it will be easier to solve. But it's like a cost like benefit thing, right? Where you have to think, well, wouldn't it also be good to know what must be true now before I have to answer all these other questions?
I'm gonna try that technique because for me, must be trues is like always the thing that I get wrong. So I'm definitely gonna try that technique for me to see if that helps me at all.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so if you guys don't have any more questions, we'll go on to the next question type. Okay, so the next question type is which of the following could be true? So for the purposes of the LSAT, this is the same as a could be false question. And the reason why is because when they're asking this question, they're asking about those variables and those spots where something could happen, but it doesn't have to happen. Right. And so if it could happen, but it also doesn't have to happen, it can also be false. Right. Does that make sense? Could be true, could be false. It's like one of those things that could happen, but doesn't have to happen. And so for this question type, what would the translation be? Does anyone have any thoughts? What are they actually asking?
So for this one, when you find the 4 that could be true, I mean, can you start marking it out by just looking at your chart?
You could start by looking at your chart and find what could be true. Is it likely? So for the could be true questions,
Mhm.
it's kind of the opposite where like it's harder to cross out answers sometimes randomly because the could be true thing like only has to show up once. And so you don't
Right.
have every combination. Can you be like, oh, this can't be true ever? Like it's harder to just randomly start crossing things out while just glancing at combinations because maybe it's not in that combination, but it could be in another combination out there somewhere. Does that
Hmm.
um,
Yes.
yeah. So the translation in general, though, for this question type, which of the following could be true, is it just has to happen once. Like we're just looking for something that's true, even if it just happens once in one combination. Just one thing is enough for it to be true, right? For it to be a could be true thing.
Would this be the kind of question that you might skip to get more diagrams and come back to?
You could. The thing with this one is you might never get like the exact combination, right? You might end up going through everything and then you might still have to do the work for it. And you might still have to do a lot of work for it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
For the must be true thing, like the more and more combinations you have, the more and more answers you can eliminate for sure. That's not the case here, right? You can't start eliminating answers really by like just looking at past combination types, looking at past combinations, because you don't know if that's all the combinations, if those are all the combinations, right? Unless you've like drawn worlds and you know everything that's happening and this can never be true. Um, it's hard, right, to just cross things out. And so for that reason, I would say you could come back to it for sure, but it doesn't have that same benefit that coming back to a must be true does. Does that
Right.
make sense?
Yep. Perfect.
So
Brianna,
would you brute? So would you brute force this then? Is what you're telling us?
Yeah, brute forcing works for every single question type. It really works for everything. It's much, much better to brute force than to sit there and just think about it for a long time, right? Like
Okay.
there's other ways to solve every question type, but if you're ever just stuck, brute force.
Okay.
Brianna, did you have a question?
Yes, my question is, since this is a could be true question and not a must be true, would they ever have an answer choice that must be true or no?
Great question. So for the purposes of the LSAT and based on like, because I've had my eye out for this for a while because I've wondered the same thing for a long time and I've never seen that happen. Like that when they're asking could be true, they're actually asking for something that happens some of the time and doesn't happen some of the time. But if you find something that you think must be true, that works as an answer, right? Does that make sense?
Yes, that makes sense. Thank you.
Usually what ends up happening though, when I found that happening to me where I was like, oh, I thought this was must be true, like, and I circle it for the answer. If I really think about it later, I realize, oh, there's a situation where that doesn't have to be true.
Does that make sense to everyone? Like, if an answer choice must be true, then it makes sense that it also could be true. But for the purpose of the LSAT, they're not going to make it that easy. Like, they're going to ask you something that doesn't have to happen every single time.
Otherwise, they just would have asked the must be true question, like if they were looking for something that must be true. I'm not saying if you find something that you think that must be true, like cross it out, because if you think that it must be true, um, that definitely means it could be true, right? And you might be wrong that it must be true, right? Because there could be a combination out there that doesn't follow that. So I'm not trying to like cause like a crisis in your head. But like basically, if you find something that works for even one combination, that's enough to pick this. That's all I'm saying. Like if it ever holds true, pick that as the answer. That's all you're looking for this question. It has like a lower bar than the must be true, right? Like you just need it for one combination and that's enough. For the must be true one, it needs to hold true for every combination. This is an easier one to brute force, I think, because you can just like put in each of the answer choices and just go through and try to like see, can this work? Does it contradict anything? So when would you try out an answer first? You would want to try out an answer first if, any thoughts? Does anyone want to guess?
A floater?
Yeah, a floater is very, very likely to be the correct answer for a could be true question, just because it can go anywhere, right? That's like by definition, it should be able to go almost anywhere. And also, if a variable is less restrictive, if a variable has less rules associated with it, if the variable is more flexible for whatever reason, it's more likely to be the answer. If I know a variable has a lot of rules with it, even if I'm brute forcing, I'm just going to skip that for now. Like I'll come back to it at the end if none of the other ones click. Does that make sense? Even when you're brute forcing, you can be intentional in like the order of the things that you're brute forcing in if that's something that clicks with you, right? If that's not intuitive to you, don't do that. But if for some reason you can immediately spot and you understand this, this is something that you can do. Does that make sense? Cool. And then the next part of this, when would you cross out an answer for a question like this?
If it can't be true.
If it can't be true? Yep, exactly. If it must be false. You cross out an answer if it never occurs and you have all the relevant combinations. That's really tricky, right? Like it's hard to know when it must be false. That's why it said it's really hard to cross out answers for this question type. Like, is it easy to know that you have all the relevant combinations? No, because otherwise you don't know whether it really must be false, right? Yeah, it's easier to find the correct answer for this because you can just brute force and go through, but it's hard to just like cross out answers without brute forcing. Does that make sense? Like it's hard to cross out answers looking at past combinations because you don't know whether it could be true somewhere else, right? You can't just cross something out by looking at honestly any number of combinations if you don't know that you have all the relevant combinations. Is this making sense to everyone? I know this is like harder to think about questions in this way, but this is so that if something clicks with you, hopefully you never have to think about it in a complex way ever again. Are any of you confused? Is this a mess? Does this make sense? Okay, let me know if you guys want me to go over anything else again. But to brute force this, what would you do? We already kind of went over it anyways. We talked about it earlier. So like to brute force this, you would basically want to try out each answer type, right? Like, or each answer. Like, so if A says, okay, F can go third, put F in third, right? Put it in the third slot and see if that works. Whichever one works, that's your answer. Does that make sense? Okay, cool.
So the one thing about games that I think is great, and I wouldn't quite recommend for you guys to do that yet until you get better at it. If you're doing a could be true question and you prove answer choice B could be true, do you need to check C, D, and E? No. There's only one answer choice that could be true. So if I get to A and I say F is in 3 and I put it in 3 and it doesn't work out, I know that's not my answer choice. Then I get to answer choice B and B says G has to be in the second spot and I put it in the second spot and it works. Okay, cool. That's my answer. It works. It could be true. Do I care about the other answer choices? No, because I know there's only one answer choice that could be true. So again, I would not recommend that you do this right now, but in the future, consider thinking that like once you prove something, you don't have to do everything else. And that's how you bank up time for those really weird questions that'll probably show up later.
For sure.
Does that make sense to everyone? Like why I would do that or why I recommend you do that later and not now?
Yeah, because I've definitely tried that and been like, all right, on to the next question, and then realized I missed a little rule, and then the actual answer was much more obvious than the one I already picked.
I think the better and better you get at games, the more and more you can rely on this. But for like, if you're still learning about games, I don't recommend doing this. It's worth it to try all the wrong answers and see what kind of wrong answers they give you and how they can trick you because there's patterns in what they do. And these patterns are much more obvious in logical reasoning, I think, but they still have patterns in how they present wrong answers to you. So it's worth it to see how the wrong answers play out anyway.
For sure.
For now.
And I think the big thing that makes the difference for like when you can just when you find the right answer, just move on is like how confident you are and how much you understand what you've diagrammed, right? If you know that your diagram is like perfect and you know that you understand all the rules and that understanding is very clear in your mind and you know, oh, 2 can go second and you feel super confident about that, even if that's A, you can move on, right? Because you know everything you did is right. Versus if you're ever unsure, try out all the answers because if you're unsure, if you try out all the answers, you're really just like giving yourself the best shot at finding the right answer, right? You might as well as try out all of them if you're unsure.
And just a quick reminder of the difference between brute forcing for these two question types. For could be true, you can be much more gracious. Like for could be true, I'm gonna try to prove everything right until the one that's right absolutely sticks out to me. But for must be false, not must be false, must be true, I'm much more harsh with it. Like I'm gonna try and prove everything wrong until something proves itself to me. So it's easier to brute force, I think, for could be true. But for must be true, like you need to get in your head that you need to like try and prove everything wrong. Does that make sense to everyone?
So just as like a quick quiz, can you rely on your past combinations for a must be true question? Like, can you rely on them? Like, look at an individual, one combination, and cross stuff out.
You could.
Yes. Could you do the same thing for a could be true question? Can you look at one combination and cross things out?
No, you need
Brute
multiple
force.
questions.
No. Yeah, you really can't. The thing you can do by looking at one combination is pick an answer for a could be true question, right? If something occurs in just one combination, you can pick it. You can pick that as the answer. But that's harder for the must be true, right? In terms of like if it's just one combination, in terms of picking it as the answer, you can't do that because you need to know that it happens in all the combinations. Is that clear? Awesome. Okay, next question type. So this slide is very, very similar to the last one. So we can just have all the bullet points, but basically for the purposes of the LSAT, this is very similar to a could be true question. And Agrishna and I were just talking about this earlier, but this question type is not as common as the could be true one. But basically for this one, we're looking for something that's false, even if it's just for one combination. And very similar to the last one, we're trying to find an answer that's less restrictive or a floater. And you cross out an answer if it always occurs and you have all the relevant combinations, aka if it must be true, right? And it's similar to the last one again. It's harder to cross out answer choices for this question type looking at past combinations, but it's easier to find the correct answer looking at past combinations, right? You just need one past combination to fit this to be like, okay, that's the correct answer. And to brute force, you want to try and make a combination where the answer choice doesn't happen. And if that works, that's your answer. Any questions on this? Okay.
No.
Okay. Next one. Okay. Which of the following must be false? So this is definitely different, right, from the other types that we went over. Must be false is like the opposite of must be true. It never occurs, right? So what would be a good translation for this question type? What are you really looking for?
Something that never happens.
Yeah, even in one combination, it just never happens. Exactly. Ever. And the answer is likely to be what? Is likely to be restrictive, less restrictive?
Restrictive.
Exactly. It's even more restrictive than the must be true, usually. Like this is the most restrictive, right? Yeah. Sometimes it just directly contradicts, often it just directly contradicts your rules, right? Sometimes it restricts a combination of your rules, and that's harder to spot just looking at your rules. But often it just like contradicts an individual rule, even. It's not going to be a floater. It's actually like very, very unlikely to be a floater unless the floater is very specifically being restricted through the local rule. It's not going to be your floater either. And then when do you want to cross out an answer for this one? Like what if you're looking at your past combinations? When do you cross out an answer?
You know they're possible.
Exactly. If it's possible, it's not going to be your answer. It's not going to be your answer. So if it could be true or if it must be true, like you don't want to pick that. You can just cross that out. It's easier to cross out answers for this question type looking at your previous combinations, but like the must be true, it's harder to find the correct answer, right? Because there could be one combination out there. Or no, yeah, you have to know all of the combinations really to say it must be false with a lot of confidence, right? If you don't have all of the relevant combinations, you can't say it must be false with certainty. So at that point, yeah, it's easier to cross out all the wrong answers. And to brute force, does anyone have any idea how they would brute force this question type?
I would just start plugging in the answer choices to see what doesn't work.
Yeah, exactly.
So this is kind of like the opposite of must be true. So instead of trying to prove everything false, I'm going to try to prove everything right. So if they say, which one of the following must be false? A, F is in 2. I'm going to put F in 2. And if F works in spot 2, does that have to be false? No. So I'm going to keep going and do exactly what the answer choice tells me. And until one of them proves me that it absolutely cannot happen, I can move on. Does that make sense to everyone? Does
Cool.
anyone have any questions?
Okay. So the accept questions. I've seen a lot of people get tripped up by these. I think they're not always certain like what it's like actually asking for and when they can pick an answer with certainty. So what is it? What are they asking for when they ask, okay, each of the following could be true except? What are you looking for?
Could be false.
Could be false.
Must
Yeah.
be false.
Oh,
Must be false. Yeah. The thing is, if something could be false, usually for the purposes of the LSAT especially, it could also be true occasionally, right? Just because something happens doesn't happen in one combination, doesn't mean that it's not necessarily like not a could be true thing, if that makes sense. So here, really, you're treating this the same exact as you would a must be false question, like in terms of what you, yeah, exactly. Like you're trying to pick something that must be false. Does that make sense?
So when they say could be true except, it means that 4 of our answer choices are going to be true. And one of them is going to be the thing that never happened. So like Shreya said, that's the thing that must be false. Does that make sense? If you want to brute force, the way you do it is just plug in your answer choices. So if they're saying could be true except, try each one, and whichever one never works out is your answer. That makes sense to everyone so far?
And then the other accept question that shows up is could be false except. So what are you looking for there? If they ask each of the following could be false except.
The one answer that's right.
What does that mean?
must be true.
Must be true. Yeah, exactly. The answer that must be right every single time. And so for this one, you could use the same exact techniques we went over for the must be true question type. Any questions about either of these? I went through a lot of different question types and I couldn't find any that said must be true except and must be false except.
They definitely exist. I just don't remember where. I'll find
Okay.
examples. I feel like I've definitely done them.
Okay, maybe they do exist. And if we're gonna make a drill for these, and so if we find them, or I'm sure they exist if a question says they exist. I didn't look through every practice test, obviously. So then we can add them into the drill and also go over that there. But just to go over it now, what if something says must be true except? Each of the following must be true except. What are you looking for?
It must be false.
Not necessarily. Yes, yeah. Must be false would work or could be false would work. Yeah. And then the other one would be each of the following must be false except, right? What would that mean?
Must be true or could be true.
Exactly. Yep. Perfect. Okay. And then there's this question type where they ask, okay, like something can be completely determined if, right? And this could also have a local rule associated with it. What are they asking for these questions, this question type? When they want you to completely determine, what does that mean?
The placement of a letter completely determines the placement of the other ones, all of the other ones.
Exactly. You want to be very confident that every single other space is being filled out with things that must go there, not just things that could go there. I think this question type trips up a lot of people because they're like, oh, I can fill out every other space. Well, that's not what they're asking for. they're asking for every other space to be filled out with must be true things from that point onward, if that makes sense. Like you can use the rules to figure out where everything else has to go. For example, what Akrishna drew. Go ahead.
If they said like which one of the which answer choice can we like will determine everything else, it can completely determine everything else, and they said R is in 4, and if I plug in R in 4, then maybe my rules make it that F comes in 1, that G comes in 3, but I don't quite know where S and T go. Like they can switch. Is my diagram completely determined?
Yeah.
No.
No, because I have these two things that can switch around. So when they say completely determined, it means that there's only one very specific way to fill it out. So maybe an answer choice says, I don't know, F must be in spot 2. And maybe if I did this, it puts G over here, R over here, S over here, and T over here. And that's the only way to fill out this diagram. Is my diagram completely determined?
Yeah.
Yes.
So that's what you're looking for, the answer choice that makes it that you can fill out the diagram in only one way. There is no other way to fill out this diagram if you put that answer in that spot.
This oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was just gonna ask if it makes sense.
I was just gonna say this is usually slightly harder for most people. The only reason is because as you're doing it, you only want to rely on the rules or like inferences that you can make and fill in stuff for sure, right? If the first example that Akarshna drew out where she had like S/T, if you had just said, oh, this space is empty, I'm gonna put S in here, and this space is empty, I'm gonna put T in here, that works, then you might confuse yourself, right? Because then you might be like, okay, did I fill everything out using the rules? Did I like determine it completely and every space like things had to go where they had to go? Or like if you get lost along the way and you're not sure if you filled out a space because you had to fill it out with that letter, or if you just put that letter because it could go there, all of a sudden you're not sure whether your combination that you've just done, if that actually answered what you were set out to do. Does that make sense? As you're filling out a combination, you only want to put things down that have to go there. Otherwise, if you just start putting things in places, you don't know whether that had to go there or not. And so you don't know if you actually completely determined the combination or if maybe S and T are interchangeable, but you didn't notice because you put S somewhere and then put T somewhere else. Or maybe they're actually interchangeable. Does that make sense?
Is this the same as a complete and accurate question? No, right?
No, complete and accurate are more for like grouping or for in and out games. Like they're trying to give you like a list. Completely determined is which like can my diagram be completely filled out?
I see the complete and accurate ones, I think, as could be true, if that makes sense. Like which of these
Yeah, that does make sense.
combination. I should have included that in that slide and I can go back and like do that again after we're done with this. But I don't see that.
Would you mind including it so that when we have this, like I don't forget?
Yeah, for sure. So
this is definitely one of the questions that I had in homework help. I know Akarshna, you and I talked about it yesterday.
For sure. And the other thing I should have mentioned, but I didn't, is the first question type for every game, right? Like the very common one that you guys see. What does that fall under? We already went over that question type, but like what does that usually fall under? When they like, the very first question where you just use the rules to cross out answers.
You mean the complete and accurate thing?
It's the first question usually for most games, the first question is going to be which one of the following could be like a valid diagram of this, or could it possibly be like a valid way for these rules to play out? And then you just have to find the one thing that could. I'm going to answer the question if I go on, but what kind of question is that?
I have no idea.
It could be true.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
You're looking for the thing that could work out with the rules. So it doesn't have to be true every single time, but it could.
I contemplated like making that a separate question type, but I was like, it's the same thing as the could be true thing, so no need to make another slide. But
you can just make a note at the bottom, be like, this includes this kind of question.
Yeah. Does that make sense why each of the first questions are usually could be true questions? Because
Yeah.
they're giving you like different combinations and asking, can this be true?
Mm-hmm.
Yep. For this, yeah, okay. Do I have anything else on this slide?
Apparently.
Yes, I do. Okay, so variables are all going to go where they must go, not just where they could go. That's what I was really trying to explain with like, you really just want to use the rules to fill in letters, right? If you can't use the rules to fill in any more letters, that means that that's probably not your answer because you didn't determine every single space and like figure out where letters had to go, right? That means everything else that's left, you could put letters with slashes there, right? It could be S/T maybe, or it could be multiple letters, right, in each space. And then what is the answer likely to be for this kind of question? This is a harder question to answer, so I'm just gonna like go over what it is, and it's less intuitive, honestly. This is something that you might notice the more and more experience you have with these kinds of questions. The answer is gonna involve a floater if you have 2 or more floaters, because otherwise you can't differentiate between them, right? Can you completely determine every single space if you have 2 floaters and you can just like change them? You can put them anywhere? No, right? Because you'd always end up with like if S and T were your floaters and if the answer didn't involve S and T, like placing them somewhere for sure, um, you'd always have S/T at the end. Does that make sense?
So counterintuitive because you just don't look at the floaters automatically.
Right. But if our answer choice said, I don't know, G must go in spot A or spot 1, where are S and T going to go? Can you determine that?
If they're
Oh.
floaters.
No,
Yeah.
it makes perfect sense because I'm always looking at those questions and I'm looking at the most restrictive ones because that must go this place or whatever. So no, that's a very good lesson that you just
Yeah.
gave us.
And the restrictive ones actually probably aren't going to be your answer. And the reason is because you can figure out where those have to go anyways. Does that make sense? Like you can figure out where those are going to go because they're restrictive. You don't need that. You don't need the question to tell you or like the answer choice to tell you that. That's not helpful additional information. And very similar to the floater thing, sometimes you have interchangeable variables that aren't floaters, right? And you usually notice those if you don't notice them immediately. Like I don't usually notice them immediately. I notice them as I'm doing the game. I'm like, oh, M and L, like they always interchange, right? Maybe they have the same rule that applies to both of them, for example, and maybe that's why they're always interchangeable, right? Maybe the only rule they have is that they both can't go with T or something like that. And so because of that, they're always interchangeable. If that's the case, if they're always interchangeable, your answer has to address that, right? Otherwise, you're always going to be stuck at the end being like, oh, M or L could go here and M or L could go there. So that's very similar to the floater thing. And the last thing that I have there, the answer is very likely to involve a variable that can trigger a series of rules that you can apply. That's the way that you can fill out every space as a must be true thing, right? Where you're like, oh, if I put G here, then R has to go here, then S has to go here, then T has to go here. The only way you can do that is if you've triggered a series of rules, right? So you want a variable that can maybe like trigger a rule, not necessarily like something that you already know that's restricted. Like if they're just kind of restating that, that's probably not going to help you, if that makes sense. Versus if you have a variable that like is associated to a rule that connects to another rule that connects to another rule, that's very, very likely to be your answer. Whatever like sets off that chain of rules. Does that make sense?
I think I'm still confused with like the floater piece of it. Like, how do you know for sure if you have 2 or more floaters? How do you know for sure which like place that they go in? Like, it would always be like S dash or S/T, S/T in 2 different areas if they don't have any rules attached to them.
Right, but that's what Shri is saying. Like if the floater, like if the answer choice says like S has to go in spot 2, then you know that T has to go in that other open spot. So they're telling you in this specific question where S is going.
Oh, I see what you mean. Okay, got it, got it. I missed that part. Okay.
If you can't pick between 2 floaters, right? Like if you're like, oh, this is what I'm always ending up with at the end, like S/T, then the correct answer is probably going to say put S here or put
Yeah.
S here, because then you can fill out everything else, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I see what you mean now. Yeah. I missed that part. Okay.
And often by the time you get to this question, this is one of the later questions. So
Yeah.
you might already notice, like if you look back through your combinations, you might notice, oh, I'm always having T/M, or I'm always having, you already kind of know what you're always filling out last and does that make sense? Like you kind of have intuition at that point in the game about what's going on in terms of like, these are the variables that I'm always like filling out at the end and they can go in either spot. If
Yep.
that's the case and you notice that, immediately find the answer that places one of those variables because that's going to help you determine everything else. Cool.
These do tend to be one of the later questions in the games, like usually like the second to last or last question. So the reason that I personally recommend just doing the questions in order, just because you already built up that intuition, like, oh, like I'm always like switching between these two. Like you don't, if you skip around questions, you're not going to build up that intuition in the order they're giving it to you. But if you do them in order, you're really well prepared to answer this question because you've done everything in a specific order. And that order, as much as LSAC hates us, they do give us a question in a specific order that helps you build patterns and inferences. I highly recommend doing them in that order. I don't know if Shreya agrees or disagrees.
No, I completely agree. I think sometimes as beginners when you're doing games, like it can be really helpful if you have questions with local rules, because the local rules sometimes just like tell you what to do first, right? They're like if G goes in 3. So then you can put G in 3 and then think about it in a more like in a way where it's not from scratch and you don't have anything to go off of. So sometimes I understand like why it can be helpful for beginners to like do certain questions first and save the other questions for later. But truly, like once you start getting better at games, doing them in order is definitely the best way to go because they're set up in that order for a reason. Like they didn't just put them in random orders. Like certain question types always come at the end. Certain question types always come at the beginning, and it's because they want you to understand certain basic things about the game before you answer those more complex questions.
Right? Like you're never going to find a substitution question as question number 1 because you don't know anything about that game yet in the sense that you haven't built up those patterns and inferences that they want you to do. So they're literally doing you a favor. Like the one time they're doing you a favor is giving you a specific order of questions. I highly recommend that you follow that order for now, or maybe in later. Like for now, maybe you want to play around with it and see what works out for you. Like I know Nicole, for example, likes to do the if questions first. So she likes all the local rules first, and then she goes through and does everything else. If you want to try that, go ahead and try that. But again, like in the end, you want to do it in the order they give you because it builds off of everything else. Like sometimes if I answer the first 2 questions, I can easily answer like the 3rd, 4th, and 5th question without thinking about anything else because I've done the first 2.
Yeah, I would worry, like if I do it Nicole's way, I would worry that then I would think that that's like a permanent rule in the game and that's how I would mess up like the other questions for myself. So like I don't think that would work for me because I'm so scatterbrained.
I would say if it helps, I don't think I've mentioned this before, but any local rules never, like actually never, yeah, never add them to your main diagram.
Yeah.
If you can, put them to the side somewhere, right? If you have to rewrite a couple of your rules to see how they interact with it or something, that's fine, honestly. Like if you start putting it into your main diagram, people like forget that they did that, or people like when you cross it out, it could make something messy or like different from before. Maybe you cross out a little bit more than you have to. Like it's just not worth it. Write it next to like whatever combination you're trying to make, right? Or if you do like the chart or graph like I do, I just like put the local rule next to that line that it applies to.
That's a good idea.
And that's so much better than like changing anything in your main diagram, unless if it's the last question, destroy everything, doesn't matter.
The one time you touch your main diagram in the middle of questions is if you spot an inference. Like if you've done a couple questions and you're like, oh, I just realized that like R can never go in spot 6. Write that down, put it in your main diagram, write R under 6, and then cross it out. You know that can never happen. So that's the only time you want to add on or touch your main diagram. Otherwise, have a main copy of the diagram so you can always reference back to it in case you get confused. You want to have something where all the information that you originally had is there. Does that make sense?
Also, for global must be true and global must be false questions, as soon as you answer it, maybe try to get into a habit of if you don't already have that written down, write it down. Because if it must always be true or must always be false, that's a rule. They gave you another rule. Like, write it down so that you don't forget that you already solved that and you know that now.
When I start getting those questions actually right, then I definitely will.
That's true. It could very, very much hurt you if you write that you got that wrong. That would suck. Yeah. That's fair. Oh, I think someone have a question. I have a raised hand in here.
Oh, is it Kira?
Yeah, Kira.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. I just had a quick question on on when you were talking about S&T. I was wondering. So when you say it's a floater, so are we figuring out where the floaters like have to go on a fully determined?
Yeah, because when you're trying to fully determine something, you need to place everything where it has to go, even the floaters.
Okay. So you saying the answer is going to be either S or T then, one of the floaters.
If S and T are floaters, the correct answer has to involve one of them, right? If they're complete floaters, the answer will have to include one of them. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Sometimes, a lot of times, you don't just have complete floaters. You have things that are like slightly restricted, only a tiny bit, or like, does that make sense? Like it gets more and more complex as games get more and more complex. But just look for things that are like really close to floaters. If you realize that a lot of things, like if you have some things that are interchangeable often, or if they're restricted in such a small way that it barely matters that it's restricted, if that makes sense.
Okay.
That those are things that the answer is likely to involve. And then when would you cross out an answer for this question type?
When you can't fill out all of the spots.
Exactly. When you can't fill out all of the spots with certainty, right? It is generally better to brute force and try out combinations for this question, like for sure, because you can't look at any past combinations and be like, this is one where I completely determined everything. Like you don't know anymore because you did that back then, right? You don't know for sure what was going on in your mind. So I would not look at any past combinations for this, brute force it, only cross out an answer if you tried it and you ended up with variables that can go in multiple places. That's when you cross something out. Don't look to see something that you already have and think, oh, that's a combination that works and I have like F and 2 there. That's what this answer is saying. I'm going to circle it. That's not a good way to go about this question. Does that make sense? The past combinations basically don't matter for this question. Any other questions about this question type? Okay, cool. The next question type, how many, minimum, maximum. I know this is like kind of an array of questions, but as general strategy for each one, when they say like how many variables can go in the first spot, for example, when they ask a question like that, you just want to go through all of your variables. Does that make sense? Like if you already know from your previous combinations that, hey, like A can go there, B can go there, I don't know about C, D, and E, well, then you're going to have to try out C, D, and E. You're going to have to try out all the ones.
Unless there's like a specific rule that says something like there's something before C. If there's something before C, can C go in spot 1? No, then you can cross that out and like forget about it. But like unless they give you a specific rule that said, did I freeze? No. Okay. Unless they give you like a specific rule that says like that helps you determine that something can't go in a certain spot, try it out.
Does that make sense? Does anyone have any questions for what to do for the how many questions? Not really? Okay. And then the next question type that I like lumped together in this, because I think they are kind of similar. When they ask like minimum or maximum, right? When they're like, maybe it's an in and out game and they ask, what's the maximum number of variables that can be in at the same time, right? Or maybe it's a grouping game and they say, what's the minimum number of like letters in group A or something? I don't know. Like there's different questions that ask for a minimum number of the minimum number of variables that can go somewhere, or the maximum number of variables that can go somewhere. And what you want to do for the minimum one is start from low to high, because then you can stop when you get something that works. Does that make sense? That's just a good strategy to go off, because then you go off of, because then you just know like when to stop trying. Let me know if that's clicking with anyone. Like if they're asking for the minimum number of variables that must be in, for example, try seeing if the lowest answer option is 0, try putting 0 in. Does that work if everything is out? Then try putting 1 in. Which one can you have in where like it would work? See if you can have just 1 in. If that doesn't work, see if you can have 2 in. And maybe that works, then you can stop, because you already tried 0 and 1, so you know it's not lower than that. You know 2 works, or 1, whatever, 2 works. I think that's what I said. If 2 works, stop there, right?
I don't know if Shri is going to agree with this, but you can sort of rely on past combinations. So if you have a past combination where you have 2 in, is it possible that the minimum number is 0 or 1?
No. Because you're saying the past combinations were 2, so the minimum is 2. Like you can work from 2 and up. No, minimum 2. I don't know what I'm saying.
You can rely on past combinations. Shri, do you agree with that?
I totally agree. I think the example that you gave, if you have a past combination with 2, you can cross off everything above 2.
Yes.
Right.
Okay. Sorry.
That's
Yeah.
what
I just
That's what I was
totally.
trying to say. Thank you.
I was like, what's math? No, you're right. If the minimum, like if you have 2, you can't, have 3 or 4.
Yeah, 3 or
That's
4
what I was trying to say.
have to be the minimum, right? If you have 2, so then what you do is cross out everything above 2, and then go down from there. Yeah, and try out everything less than 2. Even still, if you have something like that, if you want to try doing like 2, 1, and 0 because you only have like 3 or 2 things left to try out, that's totally fine. I guess when you're faced with like 5 answer options, it's better to start with low to high or high to low based on what they're asking so that you know when to just stop when you get something. Because sometimes it can be kind of frustrating when you like, okay, if you're working from high to low for a minimum thing, you basically just have to keep going even when things work. And I think sometimes that can get confusing for people. Like if they're just not sure how to solve this question type and they're just trying to make it like very, very simple for themselves, it's like when they can stop trying and like how to work through this. It just makes sense for minimum. When they ask for a minimum, to start low to high. When they ask for a maximum, start with the highest possible from the answer choices and go lower. And you're Akarshna is totally right. I would recommend you look at your past answer choices, and that's something else that I can add into the slides. Rely on past combinations. Any other questions about any of these? For the how many questions, there are questions. These are kind of frustrating for a lot of people where they ask, like, how many possible combinations are there if L goes third and G goes fifth? People get very confused about like when they stop trying. Like when do they know that they have every combination? And for that, I would say it's hard. It's hard. You just have to like, you will develop more and more like intuition and like ability to make inferences where you're like, oh, G can go 1, 2, or 3, and I like see that. And so I'm gonna put G in 1, 2, or 3 when G goes in 1. There's 2 combinations when G goes in 2. There's one other combination when G goes in 3. There's 2 combinations. It's 5 combinations that are possible. The correct answer is 5. Like that process is not easy to just jump into, but the more and more you do games, the better and better you'll get at that. It does show up for the how many questions where they're like, how many combinations can you have if this happens or if that happens? Do you have anything to add on to that, Krishna?
No, I think that's solid.
Yeah. Those are honestly just really, those are hard questions, and a lot of people get them wrong and they're like, well, I thought I had all the combinations. It's really hard to know when you have all the combinations for anything. That's also like the difference between, that's also similar to the inference for like when people can do worlds and when people try to do worlds and then like all of a sudden they're stuck with too much on their hands, right? Like you eventually you'll gain the intuition to be able to see when there's worlds, to see when there's a certain number of possibilities that can happen. Cool. And then I think we have one more question type.
I love questions.
Do you want to go over this one?
I can. Okay, so do you guys have seen those questions, right? Where it's like, oh, if we take out this rule, what can we put in to make sure it happens? Like basically what these questions are saying is if we had an original rule that said if our original game presented us that P needs to be in 2. This question will say something like, okay, let's take out that rule that P has to be in 2. What other rule or which answer choice can we put in that will guarantee that P is still in 2, even though we're not saying it? Does that make sense? So they're going to take out this rule, but you want to plug in something else from your answer choice that'll still make P still be in 2 every single time. The other thing to remember is that you may get answer choices that may guarantee that P is in 2, but it'll also guarantee that something that happened before can never happen again. So maybe one of our past combinations had P, R, S, Q, N. I don't know. And then this answer choice A, guarantees that R can never go in spot 1. So it'll say something like Q, P, S, R, N. I don't know. It'll guarantee that R can never, ever, ever go in spot 1. That can't be our answer because it doesn't give us the same results. So even though it guarantees our rule staying the same, it makes sure that one of our past combinations can never happen again. So it's not a right answer because you wanted to not contradict past choices. You want to make sure that your rule remains the same and that your general answers can still happen. So you want to make sure that if this was a combination in the past, it can still happen again with this new rule. So
Sometimes
that's the balance.
sometimes the rule is like the same thing restated in a different way, right? Like if you have a rule that's a conditional statement, maybe it's a contrapositive. That would be the simplest thing they could give you, right? Something like that. The hardest thing that they can give you is maybe this rule interacts in complex ways with other rules and they involve the variables from the other rules instead of involving any variables or positions from this rule. So
Right.
it-
Like maybe for example, we realized that R and S can only be in spots 1 and 3. Like maybe our diagram looks something like this. So proper rule substitution could be P always comes between R and S. So this would make it that our results can still stay the same and that P is always in spot 2 because it only ever comes between R and S, and R and S can only come in spot 1 and 3. Does that make sense to everyone? I know it's complicated.
Or another option, like if they didn't want to include P at all, they could say Q and N have to come after R and S, right? Because in that case, that the only place left you can put P is 2, right? Don't cross out an answer just because it doesn't involve any of the spaces or the letters that the original rule included, because that happens so many times. Like a lot of times rule substitution questions, the correct answer doesn't look anything like the original rule. To properly answer this question, often you do need an understanding of how the game generally worked, right? It makes it so much easier to pick between the answer choices. The reason why it can't contradict any existing combination is because then your rule is probably messing up, the new rule that you're trying to pick is probably messing up how the original rule interacted with other rules, if that makes sense. And in terms of like what you can do to make this question easier for yourself, you can cross out any answer options that contradict, right? So like for example, if A said, if we had that combination, or it doesn't matter, like yeah, if we had a combination where R shows up before S and the rule that we're trying to pick says R can never show up before S, that obviously can't be the rule. That's a good substitute for a rule that we already have because the rule that we already have allowed for that. But this new rule isn't allowing for that all of a sudden. Like that can't be the same rule. If you have the same rule, it needs to have the same results. Does that make sense? That's why I have like the same rule and same results thing written up there. Like if it's the same rule, if it's actually substituting for that rule, it needs to result in the same things. So for strategy, like first cross out the potential rules that contradict past combinations, right? That's a great first step. After that, you're usually only stuck with 2 or 3 options. And then you can substitute that rule in to see if it has the same effect. That's a lengthier process, but then you can feel very confident in what you've picked, right? If you sub it in and then you see that it has the same effect, which whether or not it has the same effect, you'll know because you just did that game and it's fresh in your mind what you thought when you were filling out combinations, right? These questions can take significantly longer for a lot of people. If that's true for you as a beginner and when you're like trying to improve your time and maximize your time, like if your test is anytime soon, or by the time your test comes up, like if it's taking you significantly longer, honestly, just skip it. It's not worth it. There's so few of them. You can come back to them at the end if you have time.
These questions don't show up often, and if they do, there's only like 1 per section.
Yeah.
So if this is not your hill to die on, like if you get this on game 2, don't waste your time on it. Like this one question is not it. Unless you're shooting for like a 180, you don't need this question.
Yeah.
So for now, I'd suggest, like Shreya said, skip it and then come back to it. Does anyone have any questions about this? I know there's a lot of information about this one question, and it genuinely is like the most difficult one.
Yeah. I really
Would you mind including on the slide also that it can be the contrapositive?
I could. It's honestly very rarely. I think I've seen that happen like not even once. I've seen that happen once involve the contrapositive. I can write it down. I only wrote that because that's like the simplest thing that they could do. I only said that because that's the simplest thing they could do, right? A question
Anything could happen. Literally anything could happen for a rule substitution. I don't think that's going to help you at all to know that it could be the contrapositive.
Yeah.
Shreya is a bit more intuitive than I am, so she can look at things and see if it contradicts. I brute force.
Yeah.
If you brute force, you don't need to know that it could be the contrapositive. You just plug it in and see if it absolutely 100% of the time guarantees that that rule has to happen. And so the way I brute force is if it said that like, I don't know, whatever rule it says, and if I'm trying to like substitute out for P must be in 2, I'm gonna fill this in and see if my rule lets me put P in a different spot. So if my rule says something like, I don't know, maybe like my rule lets this happen. If that happens, then this isn't true. So I'm basically trying to prove everything false until one sticks out to me that it has to be true. That
Got it.
every single time it guarantees that P must be in two. Does
Got
that make sense?
Yeah,
I treat
yeah.
it like a must be true question. I don't know if she agrees with that.
No, that's totally right. And that's kind of what I meant when I said then you can substitute that rule in to see if it has the same effect. Like that's what I meant by that part. That's kind of easier if you can cross out the potential rules, but that like contradict any past combinations. But even if you can't, like the brute forcing thing will work each time, right? Like
Cool.
the thing with brute forcing is it like always works. Like if you're ever stuck, if you brute force, it'll always carry you through.
The only thing about brute forcing is if you're not practicing with it, it can take time. But if you practice it enough, you can answer all these questions under 35 minutes and get every single thing right by brute forcing every single thing. You don't need worlds, you don't need inferences. If you can reliably have if you have a diagram you can rely on, you can brute force and get every single thing right. Does anyone else have any other questions about root substitution? I'm gonna take that as a no.
Yeah. Any general questions? Or did we miss any questions? Like, did you guys ever see a question and you guys were like, well, what is that asking for? And we didn't mention it here. I think we really got all of the questions, but if we could have missed something. Or do you guys have any general questions? Okay, I think we can move on. So what we're talking about today is hybrid games. And in general, hybrid games can be a combination of sequencing, grouping, and in-and-out games. And matching games, which I just mentioned there in passing, usually matching is just when you're trying to, for example, if you have like a lot of cars and they tell you the cars are like red, green, or yellow, then you're trying to match the cars to their colors, right? The reason why we didn't go over that as a game type is because there aren't any pure matching games, if that makes sense. Matching is always thrown in with something else. Maybe you have to organize those colors that you, maybe you have to organize those cars that you matched with colors in a sequence or something, right? Like matching will be lumped in with sequencing or grouping or in and out or one of the other game types. But that's just what it is. It's just like matching one thing to another thing. Does that make sense for what matching is? And when you're diagramming, hybrid games are generally harder for people just because they're not entirely sure how to diagram them. Sometimes people are like, okay, like, do I put the sequence as like the big thing and then I put groups underneath like the sequence, or do I put the groups first and then do I put like 1, 2, 3 in each one? Like, how do I organize this? Right? Like, if your groups are ABC and your sequence is 1, 2, 3, like, does the ABC go up first and then I have 1, 2, 3 under each of the A, B, and C thing, or do I have 1, 2, 3 and then have ABC under 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, and 3? Does that make sense? So for that question, this is a skill you will build. And I know that's kind of frustrating to hear, but the more games you do, the easier it gets. There's no one set formula, and trying to use a one set formula will like hurt you way more often than it helps you because so many games are just subtly different that there's no way really to say like this is exactly how you know how to diagram every game. It doesn't work like that. You don't want to get too hung up even on like the labels of grouping in and out versus matching and all of this stuff because it's more important to focus on what the rules of each specific game are, right? So many games are unique in just like one subtle way. And so trying too hard to think of it as a grouping game and trying to put in your mind like every single grouping game you've done before could hurt you, right? Because maybe this grouping game is a little bit different and you're failing to see how it's different because you're trying to think of it too rigidly as a grouping game. Does that make sense? There's a lot of subcategories of games, like so many, like dozens, if you go into it. I think that's like a rabbit hole once you start going down there because you can't categorize every game easily. And even the people that categorize games as like companies disagree in subtle ways. And they categorize them differently and they use different names. And so honestly, it doesn't even matter, right? To an extent. Like obviously, the only reason why it's helpful to know that something is sequencing is to know that you have to order things, right? But if you know that you have to order things already just by like reading the rules, it doesn't matter whether you know that it's a sequencing game or not really, as long as you know that you have to order, right? So it doesn't make sense to sit there and think, okay, if this is a hybrid game, like what kind of hybrid game is it? I have to know. Like that's not something you have to know really. You just generally want to diagram it to the best of your ability by focusing on the rules. Does that make sense?
This is what we mean when we say when you look at a game, you should end up building up a skill where you can look at it and see like how can I best visually represent it? Because it doesn't matter if you think it's a grouping in and out hybrid game. It doesn't matter if you think it's a sequencing in and out hybrid game. Even like multiple sequencing in and out hybrid games can look different in the diagrams.
Yeah.
So what you want to do is look at it and see how you can diagram it in a way that makes most sense to you. And if you genuinely can't figure it out, sometimes the first answer will give you like a presentation of answers that you can base your diagram off of. I don't know, something to consider. But there's again no one right way to do this. It just has to make sense to you and it has to get you to the right answers. And I know it sucks to hear that, like we really said depends like a lawyer. But it really just depends. And that sucks. But it's gonna what works for you is gonna end up working for you and not necessarily for someone else.
And sometimes or actually a lot of the times there's like multiple ways to correctly diagram something. It's just some ways might be more efficient than others, right? But even if you like mix up the bigger thing versus the smaller thing, like whether the groups are under the sequence or whether the sequence is under the groups, you can still answer the question correctly. Like you can get all the questions right. It might just be meaning that you're thinking about it in a way that it wasn't necessarily written to think about. Um, or like maybe it's not the most straightforward way, but like it can still get the job done if that makes sense. Um, so yeah, like there are different ways to diagram things for sure. Okay, and then I think the next slide is the games that we're gonna do. So we are going to start with PT 22 game 1, which I will be doing if you guys want to pull that up.
So make sure you pin Shreya's paper again.
Right, I'm gonna attach my phone really quickly. So for today, we were going to ask you guys to diagram first, and then we're all going to compare diagrams. What do you guys think about that? Because then you guys can see if your intuitive way of diagramming this is similar to what I've diagrammed. And if you guys have any questions to ask about, okay, is it okay to diagram it like this? Or is it okay to think about this rule this way? Then we can talk about that right here and now, if that makes sense. Are you guys done with that? Okay, so I'm gonna set maybe like is a 5-minute timer okay, Akarshana?
Yeah, that should be good.
Yeah, let's do 5 minutes, and if you guys need more time, just let us know. Okay, so I'm gonna turn my camera off just for a little bit so you guys don't see what I diagram.
Quick question. I keep meaning to ask this. Is it Law Hub? Is that where we're supposed to download all these from?
Yeah, Law Hub has all of the prep tests on it, and that's what I would like really encourage. And I think Akarshana would agree. Like that's what we would really encourage you to purchase for your practice tests.
Yeah, because I bought all kinds of other random stuff. And
I did buy physical copies, but it's more expensive to get physical copies of every test than it is to get like Law Hub. Just get Law Hub, honestly.
okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, is that Prep Plus?
Yes.
Yeah, Prep Plus.
Yep.
Cool.
It should be $99 for I think 1 year, and you get around 70 prep tests, or a little over 70.
Looks like this. Perfect. Okay, last question. Could you tell me which question it was again?
Yeah, of course. It's Prep Test 22, Game 1.
About the benefit dinner? Okay, got it. Thanks.
Hey, Saria, I just got a question. So I wrote out my rules and everything. Do you want me to go ahead and diagram this? Is what you're saying?
Yes, yeah. Diagram it how you would diagram it, right?
Good.
Whatever you think the setup you would use to answer all the questions for this game, write it out.
Okay.
That was 5 minutes. Do you guys want like another minute or two?
Yeah, that'll work.
Okay, I'll set the timer for another 2 minutes. Are you guys ready?
I think so.
Okay, sounds good. So I'm going to show you what I've diagrammed out for this one. Okay, so this is what I have. Also, does everyone have my paper pinned? Okay, awesome. So, any thoughts? Like, if you guys are wondering why I did anything, or if you guys have anything different and you're wondering if that works just as well.
So it's interesting how you did it, actually. I like how you did it. I'm probably going to do what you did, but I broke them out into too many little sections. So, like, I had obviously like our 7, and then I had the tables. So I can see that we had like the 3 tables. And then I had KLM is T1 or T2. I basically overcomplicated it for myself, I think. And then I had sponsor MPQ. Like, I overcomplicated. I like yours way better.
Okay, no. The only reason, so the more and more you do games, like the more and more instinctive it comes. Like, you know why they're separating certain things, for example, right?
Mhm.
Like, in terms of if it's your first time doing games and you see something that says like these are sponsors, these people are giving speeches, like you might not know, okay, why are they telling me that? Is it like for matching purposes, or is it because those are the bigger groups I'm supposed to just like sort everything by?
Yep.
More and more you do and see games, it's more and more intuitive, like what the larger idea is and what's like the more subsidiary thing you're doing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense. And I'm actually proud of myself for catching all the different things, because I did definitely like diagram all the different things. I just didn't simplify it the way that I probably should. Instead, I have like all these like little mini lines that I'm sort of referring back to. And I'm like, oh, I could have just done that with a little bracket above and a little bracket below. And like, yeah, it makes sense.
Gotcha. And if it helps in any way, I don't usually make a lot of inferences, and I'm similar to Akrishna in that way. But the only time I do take the time to make them is when I'm writing out my rules. And if I see like that there's an overlap in my rules with a letter, I'm like, okay, can I connect that? And this was the time that I could. So if L and V are always going together as they are there, and we know that KL and M have to go in 1 and 2, doesn't V have to go in 1 or 2 either, or 1 or 2 also?
Yep.
Right? If it's always going with L and L is always either going to be in 1 or 2, then that's the same case with V, right? I initially wrote V out here, but then I was like, okay, I'm just going to write it above the L, so it's clearer to me that those two are going together.
Right.
Does that make sense?
So my chart looks like yours, Saria. I mapped it out just like yours, but the only thing that I missed was that M was a speech as well as honors.
Yeah, they did that, and yeah.
So when I seen yours, I was like, oh, I didn't even realize that until I seen it. But mine's is mapped out like yours. I wrote the 1, 2, and 3.
Perfect. Yeah.
I uploaded. My camera's not working, so I uploaded mine, and it looks nothing like yours.
Okay, yeah, I can take a look at it. I think it's loading. Yeah, that does look different. Okay, you wrote out which ones are honor. Okay. I see what you did with your variables. 1, 2, and 3. Gotcha. Okay. It is what you did is kind of similar with like making like the 1, 2, and 3 columns. Can I ask why you already filled them out with different variables?
Because I was reading it as I was writing it out, so it just kind of made sense as I was writing.
Okay, so is that, I guess, were you just making like one combination that could work? Or were you thinking of using that, like, why did you fill it out, I guess, as you were doing it? Were you like, okay, this is a combination I can rely on?
I filled out the last part so I could make sure I had every of the letters accounted for.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. I guess in terms of like making a diagram, I really prefer it in a way where like I can use that diagram over and over again, if that makes sense. And that's why I use this like chart thing so so that I can just like have every single combination like listed one underneath another one. But the 1, 2, 3 thing you have down correctly. The one thing I would say, if everyone wants to take a look at what Jessica did, you put the honors and the S's as like subscripts, right? And for some games, that's really, really helpful. For some games, it's not. If that makes sense. And like figuring out when it's really helpful and figuring out when it's really not is also a skill that you'll develop. I think for this game, it's not as helpful to have honors and what does the S stand for?
Sponsors or speeches.
Yeah, honors and speeches. For this game, it's not necessary to have them as subscripts. I think because I think it's just like writing like extra things that you might not necessarily need. But for some games, that is something you might need to do, right? Is to like put subscripts for a lot of things. And once again, that's an intuition-based thing, I guess. I think here they just made some honors and made some sponsors to tell us that the honor ones had to go into 1 or 2. Like I think that was part of the primary purpose of doing that, of making some of them honors. Sorry, say that again. I think I might have missed something that someone said.
I was just saying thank you. I think I just wrote out too much.
Oh, no, that's okay. I also think in terms of writing out like a combination as you're doing it, I think it's not always helpful because as soon as you answer the first question, you'll definitely get a combination, if that makes sense. And so you can get a combination there if you want like a combination. If it helps you just to make sure that you understand all the rules correctly, like that's already the purpose of the first question, right? So it's kind of like doing a little bit of extra work if you're just writing out a combination as you're diagramming.
Okay.
But the general, I think I already said this, but the general like gist of your diagram was correct, where you like made 3 columns and then put the KLM, PQ, VZ under those columns. Like you grouped them in that sequence. Does anyone else have any other questions about how to diagram this question? Okay, cool. So for the first question, would anyone else like to walk through this question, or would you like me to walk through it?
I can walk through it.
Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
So which of the following is an acceptable assignment of sponsors to tables? Okay, so table 1, KP, I didn't like because I didn't like this one because we had KLM have to be together and LV have to be together, and we don't have L or V in table 1 or 2.
Mm-hmm.
So I got rid of that. KQZ, LV. Oh wait, let me do it by the rules, right? LPK. So I got rid of C also because it doesn't have V with L. K, Q, LV. I like D so far, so I'm keeping that. And then I didn't like E because table 3 has only 1 seating person and we need 2. So I got rid of E. I don't remember why I didn't like B, KQC, LV. Oh, we don't have M in table 1 or 2, so I got rid of B also. So D is the answer.
Yep, exactly. And there's another thing that you can do instead of checking for V, K, L, and M in 1 and 2. Like if they have to go in 1 and 2, you know that none of these can go, right? That's a faster way to eliminate a bunch of answer choices, right? Instead of checking 1 and 2, like you can just check column 3 to make sure that you don't have K, V, L, or M. In terms of like, it's just faster for process of elimination.
Yeah, I like that.
Perfect. And then question 2, which one of the following is a list of all and only those sponsors, any one of whom could be among the sponsors assigned to table 3?
I'll give it a shot.
Okay, so this is asking for all of the people who can be assigned to table 3.
So first I look for the ones that have P and Z because they're already there in my diagram.
Yep.
So I eliminate A, B, and D. So then I want to find out if the difference, which is V, works, but it doesn't because there's no L. So my answer is C.
Perfect, exactly. P, V, and Z are your only options for 3. And if you want to write that in, you can, right? P, V, and Z, not all of them have to go in 3, but how many do? How many of these?
2.
Exactly. So what I would even write here, if you wanted to be really specific and like not confuse yourself at all, minimum 2 out of these 3 need to go into this column.
Wait, Shreya, I think you meant PQZ because VK are going. All right. Just want to make sure.
Oh yeah, thank you. Because I was like, wait, where's V? Okay.
That was my bad. And I also I meant to write in this combination and I never did. So this combination, the one that we got from the first one, LQV, KM, and then PZ. Perfect. And the other way you could answer question 2, right, is just looking at all the letters except VK, L, or M. Because VK, L, and M are being used up here, and we know all the letters will be used, right? So the only options for 3 are the ones that are left. So the other ones other than K, L, M, and V are P, Q, and Z, right? And both of those like ways of doing it work perfectly, and they're both like equally efficient.
So
Oh, go ahead.
okay, but wait, but the answer choice for number 2 is definitely C. It's PQZ, right?
Did I say PV again?
No, sorry. I'm just looking at the diagram, and the diagram that you have on there, I think, is still question choice 1. So that's why I'm just making sure.
Oh, yeah, this is from 1.
Yeah, yeah, okay.
Okay, yeah. So remember how we said like minimum
Yeah.
2 of these 3? So like
Yeah,
this
yeah.
and Z, 2 out of the 3. So that's why this combination works, right? Awesome. So number 3. Does anyone want to try number 3? Number 3 is asking if K is assigned to a different table than M, which one of the following must be true of the seating assignment? So if K is
I'll try it.
awesome. So I would write this in as a local rule, right? K and M aren't going together for this row.
Okay, I'm gonna have to write this out myself. So if it says if K is assigned to a different table than M, which of the following must be true of the following C? K is seated at the same table as L. We're looking for something that must be true, but K doesn't have to be seated with L, does it? Let's see. Oh, yeah, that must be true. That must be true because K can't go in 3.
K can't go in 3. That's true. So wait, when I have this diagram to the side, what this means for my diagram, right, is that K/M will be going here and K/M would be going here, right? And then what's going on with LV?
LB must go together.
They must go together. So how I could do that is I could put L and V in a box here and say that they're going either here or here, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're going in one of those 2 places.
Right.
So then what's going on? Do they have to go with K?
No.
K is assigned to a different table than M. Which of the following must be true? K would have to go. Well, I guess M could go with L and V.
Exactly. Yeah. M could also be going with L and V. So I'm not sure if A has to be true, right?
Yeah, no, the other A doesn't have to be true.
We could put L and V here, for example, and put them with M and then put K over here, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So L is here at the same table as Q. That doesn't have to be true.
L and Q,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because L definitely doesn't have to be with Q, right? If we put L and V here and put them with like M, for example, it's not with Q and that still works, right?
Yeah. C is wrong too. M doesn't have to be at table V with V either.
Yep. And for the same reason as like why for A and B, right? Like those combinations that we made, it's not true that it has to be with L and B.
Exactly 2 sponsors are seated at 3. Exactly 2 sponsors are seated at 1. So for exactly 2 sponsors are seated at 1, I can do either KM or LV.
Yeah. And so that could be 3, right? Like
Yeah, it could be KM or you could put Q over there, so that doesn't have to be true.
Yeah, you could also put Q over there. That's totally true. So it doesn't have to be true, right? You can have sponsors seated at table 1, but you can also have 3 sponsors seated at table 1, right?
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
So it would have to be E then.
Right, it would have to be E. And do you guys see why it has to be E? Let's say we decided to put LV here, for example. We need another letter for this space, right? Because if K or M is going here, that's 1 letter, but there needs to be a minimum of 2 per table, right? And so we need a second letter here, which means we're going to take one from our PQZ options for column 3. We're going to move one of those over to 2. And then there would be 2 things left.
Okay.
Which one?
Sorry, can someone mute?
Okay. Does that make sense for why E would be correct? That exactly 2 sponsors would be seated at 3, right? And it doesn't matter which ones. Does it matter
Hey,
which?
Sahil, can you infer this without actually breaking it down like this?
Can we infer it from the beginning?
Yes, without actually like breaking it down, like you just, broke it down. Could you infer this before you actually like wrote this out?
I think without writing out anything, it's pretty hard to infer this. It depends on how good you are at like inferences and how good you are at just seeing things. People usually do get better and better at that as they do more and more games. But I think it would be very, very difficult to see that if K and M go in different places, we're using one of these letters in 1 and 2. Like, I think it's very hard to see that unless you at least write down something. That's just my opinion, though. Like, I don't know. Some people are better at doing inferences, but I think that'd be pretty hard to do. Does this question make sense to everyone?
I just have one last question. So when it says exactly 2 sponsors are seated at table 3, I don't understand. Why does that have to be true?
For sure. Okay, so let me go over that again. If K or M has to go here and K or M has to go here, we have one thing for each for 1 and 2, right? We have one variable.
Right.
So this is like one variable, right? This is sending 2 variables. So if we put this here, we have a spot here that needs to be filled, right? Because you need at least 2 variables per table.
Right.
So if we put L and V in 1, then we still need something for 2. If we put L and V in 2, we are still going to need another variable for 1, right? And so that variable, since we used up VK, L, and M already, that extra variable that we need is going to be coming from P, Q, or Z.
Okay.
We're going to have to pull one of these over here into column 1 or 2, and then we'll only have 2 variables left for column 3.
Gotcha.
Does that make sense? So like just to show you an example of a combination, like if we pick K for here and then LV, then we have M for here, right? Don't we need to have another letter here?
But that doesn't necessarily have to be true though, because couldn't you put, because Q's the floater, right?
Kind of, yeah.
No, Z's the floater.
Here we kind of have multiple floaters, right? Like P, Q, and Z are kind of just doing their own thing. They're not entirely floaters because they still are restricted in this way, right? That 2 out of 3 of them have to go in column 3. So they have like a mild restriction, but you're right that they're more floaters in general. Like they're kind of floating around. But no, you were saying like it doesn't have to be true that you have to pull one of these into 1 or 2.
I don't know. I guess I'm confused on that as to why you can't have
So these letters
3 and 3 then.
Right. These letters are grouped together. If we
Right.
have 3 and 3, you're saying like pull another one here?
Yes.
Okay, good question. So if we pull 2 letters, right? Like if we put Q and P or something here, then all of a sudden we only have 1 letter left for 3. And we need at least 2 per table.
But could we just put 2 and 1 and 2 and 2?
Great question. Can we put 2 and 1 and 2 and 2? If K/M is what's going on, right? That's the local rule. K and M are places. L and V is what you have left. And they have to go together. Can you put 1 here and 1 here?
Nope.
No, that's why you can't have 2 and 2.
Gotcha.
Because
Okay,
L and V
makes
are
sense.
always going together.
Okay, I got it. Thank you.
Okay. Awesome. Question number 4. Any thoughts on 4? 4 is asking if Q is assigned to table 1 along with 2 other sponsors. So how I would diagram that is put Q in with 2 other people, and then they're asking which of the following could be true of the seating assignment.
I can try.
Yeah.
So I guess I would do like the previous question, LV together, they can go either 1 or 2.
Mm-hmm.
And then K and M, they can also be either 1 or 2.
Right. And K and M. Yep.
So like it's 2, yeah, 2 of the spots, I guess each of them can be like KM slash, yeah, so like that. And then that leaves us with P and Z on the third.
Right. Perfect. And these are set, right? We know where P and Z are.
Yeah.
set.
So then K is seated at the same table as L. So I think this is the
But-
answer then.
Oh, I was just gonna say for this, can you split up K and M? Could you put one of them on this side and one of them on this side?
Yeah.
You can?
Um,
No. Like what would that look like? So if we put L and V on this side,
no. They have to go together because of the 2, because L and V together.
yeah, they have to go together because this is saying we need 2 things
Come
here,
on.
right? So if L and V go on this side, that's the 2 things. If L and V go on
Get
this
on the
side,
other side.
we need K and M to fill these 2 spots, right? So K and M have to go together.
Okay.
So when K, you realize that, can A be true?
K is seated at the same as L. Then no. Okay.
No, because then
No,
you have
right. Yeah.
4 letters on at one table, right?
Okay, so that's not that. K is seated at the same table as Q. Doesn't have to be.
Right. That doesn't have to be true. This question is just asking what could be true.
Could be. Could be.
Yeah, K could be at the same table as Q, right? We could have to write out what that combination would look like. That would look like Q, K, M, and then you'd have LV over here, right? And then you'd have PZ. Does that work?
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, it does.
So that's the answer.
Yeah, that's the answer.
Okay.
Does anyone have any questions about this one? Any thoughts? Okay. And then question number 5. If the sponsors assigned to table 3 include exactly one of the sponsors who will give a speech, then the sponsors assigned to table 1 could include any of the following except. So if the sponsor for table 3 include exactly one of the people who give a speech, right? So the people who give a speech are M, P, and Q. Could M be in 3?
No.
So that means we're picking between P and Q for one of them, right? So it's P/Q. And then, so what does the other letter have to be?
Z.
Exactly. Z has to be the other letter here. And then they're asking the sponsors assigned to table 1 could be anyone except who can't go to table 1.
Z.
Yeah, Z is one of the answer options, right? They're saying, can Z go in 1? No, it can't, right? Z can't go in 1 because we need Z here. If we're selecting between P and Q, because we can only have one person who's giving a speech, then the other spot has to be filled by Z because we need 2 out of these 3. Does that make sense?
So the answer is Z for this one.
Yeah, that would be E.
Got it.
Does
It's
that
an
make
interesting question because you want to go and look at what can go in 1, but you're actually looking for what has to go in 3.
Yeah.
right? So for what can go in 1, a lot of what my general strategy is, and I know the way Krishna and I do games is differently, but what I generally try to do is like write down the local rule if there is one, and then I'll look for what connections I can make from that, right? Usually if they give me a local rule and they're asking a question about it, I can go further than that, right? I can make some further inference than what they've given me. I can connect that to the rules in some way. And so I write it into my diagram and see what that means. Like if they're saying that, okay, one of the sponsors who gives a speech is in 3, only one, what does that mean? That means that the other person has to be Z. And then can I connect that to anything else? I don't think so. So that's when I stop. Like if I don't see any other easy connections to other rules, that's when I stop and then try to think about the answers. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay. Does anyone have any more questions about 5? Okay. And then so 6, if 3 sponsors, exactly 2 of whom are giving honors, are assigned to table 2. So table 2, we have 2 sponsors exactly. if 3 sponsors, sorry, and then 2 of them are receiving honors, so that's K, L, and M, right? We're having 2 out of those 3. Sorry, I should. Okay. Which one of the following could be the list of sponsors assigned to table 1? And all of the answers have 2 options. Or sorry, 2 letters. So for this game, 3 variables together only occurs in 1 column, right? You can't have 3 here and 3 here because then you only have 1 variable left for column 3, if that makes sense. That's also, I guess, like a general inference that I made earlier, but I forgot to vocalize. So for this, where would you go from here?
Would you write who can go in 1 and 2? Well, we already know that, I guess.
I'm gonna put L and M, or excuse me, L and V into the 2 column
Mm-hmm. And why is that?
because only 2 of L and V have to go together, and only 2 of the people in the second column can have honors. So there has to be 3, which means it has to be L and V.
Yep, exactly. What happens if you put can you put K and M here? And then have the third one be like Q or something?
No,
Why not?
I don't know the answer to that. I just don't think you can. But maybe you can. Can you?
I don't know, I'm asking you. Can you put that? So
According to my diagram, no, you cannot.
why can't you? Like what in your diagram is restricting that?
Okay, so if you put K and M there,
Then you pick 2 out of these 3, right? And then what if your third one was like Q or something?
so if you put K, M, and Q there, you'd have to put L and V in 1.
Yeah.
And then you'd have to put V in, or
P and Z. Yeah.
P and Z. I don't know. Why can't you do that?
Yeah, you can do it, right?
Okay.
I was just trying to push you because you're right that you can do this, right? I guess it's also good though to see that you can do this, right? Because this is a could be true question. They're not asking like since there's so many possibilities, you should be, as you're training yourself to do games, you should be pushing yourself to see all the possibilities.
Right. Okay. So what I did was I got to K, and Z, and that worked. So
Right. No, that's totally fine. Like you can get there and that could work. But what if this had been the answer? And what if you wouldn't have gotten there unless you had tried out this?
No, it's a good point because I didn't know. I didn't realize I didn't know until you told me I didn't know.
Right. So I know I was just saying this is another possibility, but you're totally right that with this, you can make it work, right? If you have L and V here, and then if you said M here, right?
Yeah.
Right. If you put M here, right, the letters that are left over for here are K and then one of these 3, right? So if you can have K here, the second letter can be P, Q, or Z, and we have an option where Z is involved, right? B says, okay, can Z be here? Yes, it can. And then what you'd have for this third column is P and Q. You're completely right that this is like the answer, but this is also just a valid combination, and this could have been a correct answer, right? If L and V had been an answer option, that would have been the correct answer option.
Yep. Got it.
Okay, and then can you hear sub? Oh, here, can you sub M and K for one another?
Yeah.
So another correct answer option, like once you've written out this combination, if you realize that, right, all you have to do is put M/K, M/K. Sorry, that's a little messy, but then you have all 3 of the possibilities that can happen. This is everything, I believe, for what's going on. You have 2 combinations in this one combination that's written out, M/K, and then this is the other scenario, right, where you don't have LV here and you put LV out here. Those are the 3 things happening in question 6. Does that make sense? Okay. And then 7, which one of the following conditions, if added to the existing conditions, results in a set of conditions to which no seating assignment for the sponsors can conform? This is not a question type we went over, but what are they asking here? This is so rare that I don't know if it's worth adding to the different question types, but what are they?
Seen this before. This is the first time I've ever seen it.
Same. I've never seen this before either. I've also since this is a really, really simple game, I didn't do it before this class. So when I just saw this just now, I was like, that's something I could have included
I
as
promise it's easy. I did do this game before. It's easy, I promise.
yeah. But what does this like question mean? Any thoughts? They're asking you for a rule where if you add it to your existing set of rules, where
Change anything else?
no, not that it doesn't change anything else. They're saying if you add this rule, it results in a set of conditions to which no seating assignment can conform. What does that mean?
So does that mean no one will have a seat?
Exactly. It means that it just won't work out. And so what kind of thing are you looking for? If they're asking for something where like nothing can, it just doesn't work, what are they asking for?
What makes it everything impossible?
The rule
Exactly.
that breaks all the rules.
Perfect. Yep. You're looking for something that contradicts, basically. Basically anything that contradicts what's going on. And for that, you can just use your past combinations too. Does that make sense for why you could use your past combinations?
Yeah.
If this rule is breaking up stuff, it shouldn't fit your past combinations, right?
Is it B?
Any sponsor giving a speech is seated at table 1 or table 2. So sponsors giving speeches are M, P, and Q. Do P and Q have to be at 1 or 2?
No.
No. That actually leads to things not working out, right? I realize I never crossed out an incorrect combination here. But yeah, other than that, I should have crossed that a long time ago. But if you have P and Q both in 1 and 2, you only have one letter left that can go in 3, right? So adding in that rule would mean that you can never get a correct combination. Does that make sense for why B, if you added in B, you would not get even one combination that worked, because all you're left with is Z for the third column. Just to look at the other questions, A, or the other answer options, A is saying at most 2 sponsors are seated at table 1. So is that possible to get a combination where at most 2 are in 1?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's possible, right? I can make a combination for that. This question's asking, like, we want a set of conditions where no seating assignment can happen, right? So we're looking for something that like makes it so we just can't even make one combination. C, any sponsor giving a speech is seated at table 2 or else 3. That could work, right? If you can have them in 2 or 3, that can work. Here's an example where they're in 2 or 3, right? And then exactly 3 of the sponsors are seated at table 1. We have combinations where 3 go at 1, right? That's not an issue. Like here's one, for example, the first one, for example. And then E, any table at which both L and B are seated also has a third sponsor seated at it. So can L and B be with a third sponsor?
Yes.
Yeah, we have, that's in our first combination, right? L and B are with Q here, for example. So all of the other things, you can make at least one combination with them, right? It doesn't completely break the game apart. Versus B, if B was one of your rules, you can't even make one combination because that directly interferes with the minimum 2 per table rule. Because what ends up happening is that if you have P and Q also seated at 1 or 2, then all of a sudden Z is the only thing that can go in 3, and that breaks this rule, right? Minimum 2 per table. That rule and B are just completely incompatible at that point. Does anyone have any questions about this game in general? Okay, I'm sorry that took so long. I think it took a little bit longer than I thought it was going to take. Okay, Chanel?
So we are planning on doing another game today, but I know it's late. Richard, it was the game that you requested. You guys don't have to stay if you don't want to, but if you do have time, I do recommend that you stay because it's a good game to go over and start thinking about different ways that you can include other things in a sequencing. I don't know if that makes sense, but like I recommend that you stay is one of the more complicated things that I think we're going to start looking at. But it's not that difficult once you like go through it. So if you guys want to stay, feel free. But if not, then that's totally fine. I will send out an email with homework and office hours for this week. And I think I'm probably going to do office hours this time because I can't do it after Wednesday because that's too close to my LSAT. I'm not doing that. So I'll probably do office hours early this week. But we'll send out that information too. But let me share my screen. Can you guys see my screen or no?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is PT60 game 3. Not gonna lie, kind of sucked, like looking at it in the beginning, but it made sense after. Richard, do you want to talk about this game a little bit and like tell me what you were thinking?
Is no.
No, like you just didn't have any thoughts. Like you were like, I'm done. I don't know what I'm doing.
I mean, I tried to diagram it out, and I think I just really didn't know what was happening, and the cleaning between things threw me off because I didn't know, like, can you clean before or after the first load or the seventh load? And even when I was going through the answers and like seeing what the answers were, it just wasn't clicking. So yeah.
Yeah, that's totally fine. I think this is a weird game, but it's not as bad once you really think about it. So it says over the course of one day, a landscaper will use a truck to haul exactly 7 loads. So we have 3 loads of mulch, so 3 mulch, and 4 stone. So automatically what I'm thinking is I'm probably going to order this in some way. The truck's cargo bed will be cleaned between carrying any 2 loads of different materials. So it's going to be cleaned when switching. So if you had mulch and then you're switching to stone in between that, there's going to be a cleaning. Does that make sense? Or if you go from stone to mulch, it's going to be clean between that. But if you have just stone and stone, there's not going to be any cleaning. So you only clean when you're switching between 2 different kinds. Does that make sense? Okay. So to answer your other question, it's not going to be cleaned before it starts or after it ends. It can only be cleaned between the 2 switching. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay. And it says to meet the landscaper's needs as efficiently as possible, the following constraints apply. So the first rule says the cargo bed cannot be cleaned more than 3 times. So that means it's cleaned a maximum of 3 times. That means it can be cleaned once, twice, or 3 times, but no more than that. Make sense? Okay. And it says the 5th load must be mulch. So number 5 has to be mulch. So if I were to draw a main diagram, I just set up 7 lines. And in a 5, I'd write an M because I know it always has to be mulch. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay. 13 says, wait, does anyone have any questions before I move on to the answers or to the questions? Does this make sense to everyone? Okay. 13 says, which one of the following is a pair of loads that can both be mulch? So this is a could be true question. So I'm just going to try and see which one works. So the first thing I do is get out my little diagram. Draw mulch here. And now I'm going to try and put mulch here and here for answer choice A. I know there's only 3 loads of mulch, which means everything else has to be stone. Cool. Now I see where the cleaning fits in. So I'd have to clean every time we switch between mulch and stone, which means we'd have to clean between 1 and 2, between 2 and 3, between 3 and 4, between 4 and 5, and between 5 and 6. That's more cleaning than we actually can allow because we can only have a maximum of 3 cleanings. So A can't be my right answer. Does that make sense? Does anyone have any questions about how I did A? Okay. So I know that A can't be my right answer. So I'm going to take this all out and then try B. So this time I'm going to plug mulch into the second and third, which would leave stone everywhere else. Now check for the cleanings. One would be over here where it switches. The next would be here, then here, then here. And that means I have 4 cleanings, but we can only have a maximum of 3. So can this be the right answer?
No.
No. Does someone want to try C?
I'll try C.
Okay.
Okay, so you put mulch in 5 and then mulch in.
You're looking at C. Mulch is always going to mean 5.
No, I know. I'm just saying like that.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
I was like, wait, what am I looking at? And then you put mulch in the second spot and the 6th spot. And then you put S all across. And then you have a cleaning spot, one cleaning spot between S and M, another cleaning spot between, 4 and 5. Oh, right. I forgot about that cleaning spot. And then another cleaning spot then between M and S, so 6 and 7. So that's too many. So that breaks the rule.
Cool. Does someone want to try D?
I'll try it.
Okay.
So you're gonna put mulch in 3 and 6,
Mm-hmm.
and then the rest will have S. And then in between 2 and 3, you're gonna have a cleaning. And then in between 4 and 5, well, 3 and 4, you'll have another cleaning. And then you'll have one last one between M and S at the end. Well, actually, you have one right here where it says S and M as well. So that's too many.
Yep. So this can't be my right answer either, which means that E is my right answer, but let's diagram it so we can have it. So this one says 4th and 6th, which should mean everything else is stone, and my only cleanings would only be between those 2. So that's perfect. It follows all of my rules, and I only have 2 cleanings. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Are you guys ready to move on to 14, or do you have any questions about this?
That one was intense.
Yeah, it's a lot of diagramming.
It is. If you can look and see that like putting something in a certain spot would result in too many cleanings, like you can cross them off immediately. But for me, I can't immediately look. I'm very visual, so I need to draw them out. But it's still quick. Like you can solve this really quickly if you're just quick about writing it out and going through the brute forcing pretty quickly.
And we're also safe to say for 13 then A, B, C, D just are not combinations that we're going to use in the rest of the puzzle, right?
Yeah.
They're all wrong. Cool. And I'm going to just make one big old X right now.
I already see where I got confused. I wasn't doing the cleanings between S and M. I was trying to group them into 2s. So if there was like an S and M at the beginning, I was trying to do a cleaning before that and then after that.
Okay. So instead of putting them between them, you were trying to like, if you had S and M, you were like, oh, before and after.
Right. So yeah, so it makes sense that I couldn't figure out anything.
Okay. That makes sense. Do you guys have any other questions before we move on to 14? All right. 14 says, which one of the following must be true? So the first thing I'm going to do is try and cross out things that might not be true based off my first diagram. So A says the second load is stone. Maybe that has to be true. I don't know, based on my first diagram. B says the first and second loads are the same material. Maybe. C says the second and third loads are different materials. Is that definitely true or definitely wrong? Or maybe it's wrong.
No.
So can I cross it off?
Yes.
Yes, because if you look over here, the second and third materials are the same material. So it doesn't have to be true that they're absolutely the same or different. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay. D says at least 2 loads of mulch are hauled consecutively, maybe, and at least 3 loads of stone are hauled consecutively, maybe. So now I just have to brute force and see if anything works out. I'm gonna write mulch over here because I know that has to be true. And then I'm gonna try and see if I can brute force anything and see that if I can make it that they're not true. So this A says the second load is stone. So maybe I want to make this M, make this M2, these two S, which would result in a cleaning here, here, and here. So does it have to be true that the second load is stone?
No.
No, so I can cross that out. The other thing I can cross out, let's take a look at E. At least 3 loads of stone are hauled consecutively. Based off this diagram, does that have to be true every single time?
No.
So I'm going to cross this out. So let's take a look at B now. B says the first and second loads are the same material. So maybe I switch it around to say S is over here and M is over here, which results in a cleaning here, here, and here. Does this follow my rules?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so does it have to be true that the first and second loads are the same material?
No.
No. So I can cross that out, which leaves me with D. At least 2 loads of mulch are hauled consecutively. Make sense? Does anyone have any questions so far? Okay, then I'm gonna go to 15. 15 says, if the third load is mulch, which one of the following must be true? So I put mulch over here, and mulch over here, and I have to see which one must be true every single time. The 6th load is a different material than the 7th load. So I'm just gonna plug this in and see if it'll work out. Or sorry, if so I'm trying to prove everything wrong. So it says the 6th load is a different material than the 7th load. I'm gonna see if it can be the same and if it'll work out. So if I do this, does it have to be true that the 6th load is different than the 7th?
No.
No, so I can cross that
Didn't
out.
you just sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. But can you just look at the two that you already had made and make that inference, the one that you just made on 14?
No, wait. What do you mean?
Because you have S and S at the end already.
Right, but remember we're introducing a specific rule for 15 that M has to be in 3. And if you look at our first 2 diagrams that we used, M was not in.
Okay, yeah, I see it.
Does anyone want to try B?
Not true, because you could do stone, stone, mulch, 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 stone, stone.
Right, the diagram that we just had. And if that works out, perfectly fine. So we don't care about B anymore because it doesn't have to be true every single time. Let's take a look at C based off this diagram. Does that have to be true?
No.
No.
Now we're stuck between D and E. Does the 6th load have to be mulch?
No.
Let's find out.
Well, it doesn't, because your other diagram had S.
You're right. Yes, you're right. Oh, why did I just erase that? You're right. Which means I'm left with this. I have to have stone in the first load. Does this make sense to everyone? Anyone have questions about number 15? I know this game sucks a little bit.
Yeah.
Do you guys have any questions so far? Do you want me to go on to 16?
Yeah.
16 says if the cargo bed is cleaned exactly twice. So now we're kind of ignoring the maximum 3 rule for this specific question. We're looking at exactly 2 times it's being cleaned. Which one of the following must be true? Does it have to be true that the second load is stone? Well, let's see. Is there a different way for us to get 2 cleanings and have it not be stone in the second load? So we have 2 diagrams so far that have only 2 cleanings, 13 and 15. What I would do is try to cross off answers that don't have to be true. So if you take a look at B, the third load is mulch, and then you take a look at diagram for number 13, it doesn't have to be true. You can have stone in the third load and it can still be fine that you still have 2 cleanings. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to cross off B. And then same thing with C. If I take a look at diagram for number 15, it doesn't have to be true that the third load is stone. So I can cross that off too. Does that make sense?
No, that doesn't make sense to me because in 15 we had the additional rule.
Right, but we still have the cargo bed is being cleaned exactly twice. So this time that's all we're looking for. We're
Got
looking
it.
for what must be true every time the cargo bed is being cleaned twice.
Got it. Got it. Got it.
Does that make sense to everyone? Okay. D says the 6th load is mulch. But if I look at the diagram for 15, the 6th load is stone. So does D have to be true every single time?
No.
No.
No. So I cross that off. And then E says the 7th load is mulch. Does that have to be true every single time?
Nope.
No, because if you look at 13 and 15, it's stone both times. So this definitely doesn't have to be true, which leaves me with A.
Hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions so far?
Mm-mm.
Okay. Are you guys ready for number 17 then? Okay. If no more than 2 loads of the same material are hauled consecutively, then which one of the following could be true? So what does this question mean if when it's saying if no more than 2 loads of the same material are hauled consecutively?
You got to put a cleaning in there somewhere.
Yes, but what they mean is you can't have stone, stone, stone together. You need like at most you can have stone and stone together, and it would have to be mulch. So you can't have no more than 2 loads consecutive.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense to everyone? What question 17 is really saying? I'm gonna assume yes, since no one else is saying anything. So all I would do is really try and brute force this and see if it works out. So A says the first load is stone, so I'm gonna plug that in and see if it works out. Stone, maybe, I don't know, I put another stone here, mulch here, stone here, and then stone here. No, yeah, and then mulch here. I don't know. But this would result in way more cleanings than permissible. So this can't be true. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
No
Yeah.
matter how I try to configure this, like no matter how I try to do this diagram, if I put stone in that first spot, it won't make any sense for this particular question. So I'm gonna cross A out. And you can try multiple, like I suggest that you do this game later on your own. And if you tried out all the possible different combinations by putting stone in the first spot, it's not gonna work out. It'll result in way too many cleanings. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. 17 says, or B says, the 4th load is stone. So I'm going to put stone over here and see where it works out. So maybe I put mulch over here and stone over here, which already results in 2 cleanings. And I put another stone over here. And then a mulch over here and a mulch stone over here. That won't work out, but I feel like there's another. I see. Okay, I see now. If you put stone both over here, and then you would put mulch over here. Okay, this works out, right? If you're to put stone in the 4th spot, oh no, I screwed that up too. Stone over here, and then mulch over here. This would result in the right combination. Does this make sense? I know I kind of sped through that, but I can walk through B again if you need.
What answer choice is that?
This is B. Do you want me to walk through B again? I know I kind of sped through that.
Yeah.
Okay, let me erase. So B introduces the 4th load being stone. So now I have to see if it's possible to configure that in the right way. Which means I already have one cleaning here, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so you can try different combinations. It took me a couple tries to get the right combination, but what ended up working was if I put stone over here for 2 spots, which would result in a cleaning over here. Then I put stone over here and mulch in these 2 spots, which results in a total of 3 cleanings, which is fine for this question. All we need to make sure is that there's a total of 2 or a maximum of 2 consecutive being the same. So I don't ever have like 3M in a row. I don't ever have more than 2S in a row. I only have 2 at a time, maximum. So B for this works out perfectly fine. If I introduce a condition that no more than 2 loads of the same material can be hauled consecutively, then it could be true that S is in 4, and it works out fine.
Got it.
This question kind of sucks.
It does.
I
Whole game.
really recommend you try it again on your own and see if you can get to the same answers. Play around with the different combinations. I don't know if Shreya would have done this any differently, but personally for me, it just worked to brute force really quickly. And it took me about 6-7 minutes to solve this game, but like that was just quick brute forcing over and over again for every question.
I remember when I first tried this game, for some reason, I was like, I did the first question and I was like, okay, this rule with cleaning is so restrictive, right? Like so many things didn't work because it's really restrictive where the M's can go. And so I was like, I'm just gonna write down all the combinations that can occur. That was a mistake because there were actually like 12 or something. There's quite a few, which was quite surprising to me. Maybe there wasn't 12, but there was like 8 or 10. There was quite a few. It was more than I was expecting. I was expecting there to be like 4. And what I realized though, like when I did that was I was like, okay, wait, either all the M's go together, or if one or two of the M's is away from the is it that the fourth, fifth M, what happens is they go at the edge. That way you're not wasting a cleaning on both sides. Does that make sense? So like that's what's I guess going on in this game, right? Either all the M's are together in one place, they're all right next to one another, or if an M is ever separate, it's all the way at the end, one end or the other, because then it only takes away one cleaning, and then the other 2 cleanings you use on the other M's that are separate.
You can't ever have all the M's separate because that would result
And so
in all those cleanings already. So at least 2 of them need to be together every single time.
and then those 2, if they're away from that M that has to go in fifth, they need to be at the end. Like if you try to put them in 2 and 3, for example, you still end up with 4 cleanings because you have to put them on either side.
What type of game is this considered? Is this considered a sequencing game?
It would be like miscellaneous because sequencing is like putting stuff before and after, right? Like
Oh, okay.
and this isn't quite that.
It does have some sort of an ordering element, but it's not as important as it definitely has to go in these spots. It's like you order it, but you also have like one of those weird twists to it. So this is why we say don't get so stuck on trying to classify them.
Got it.
Sometimes it's helpful, a lot of times it's not. And if you guys want to do a similar game to this, I looked it up. Give me 1 second.
There's a lot of great miscellaneous games.
Yeah, no, there's one game that's okay, wait. I'll text it, I'll send it in an email to you guys, but there's one game, it's on a later prep test, so you might want to save it because like the 80s you might want to just take.
Oh yeah, I don't want to do 80s yet.
Yeah, but there's one game in there that's very similar to this game, but otherwise like it's pretty rare. Like this.
Remember what it's about?
It's about different months. It like goes all the way from March to October. The hard thing about that game is there's so many columns.
PT 89.
I think it's 89. Yeah. Maybe it's
The first game on PT 89.
How have you guys heard anything more about how the January LSAT test was? Because I heard like a lot of people just didn't do that well on it, like they anticipated, because the questions were so much harder. Like,
I don't think it was the questions being hard. I genuinely think they adjusted the scale a little bit. I don't know, like I have been sitting here with like a tinfoil hat on with conspiracy theories about what happened in January, but I think they switched the scale.
What does that mean?
yeah, what does that mean? I thought that would help us.
No, so if you look at a scale, it's more for like helping like understand how you get to like a 170. So normally a scale would be like, oh, to get to a 170, you can get -7 or -8. That's usually the normal scale. I think they tightened it up a little bit, so now instead of a 1 like a -7 or -8, you have to get -6 to get a 170. I don't know, I genuinely like, it's very difficult for me to understand how so many people who are PTing high 170 scored way lower.
Yeah.
It could have also been like that maybe those questions were like, you know, when you have like 2 answer options that you're down to and then you like pick one and then it's like the wrong one or something. Maybe
Mhm.
that happened with a lot of questions because maybe they weren't straightforward or intuitive for most people or something like that happened. Like that's the only explanation I can think of where so many people
But, like,
PT,
also a lot of people came out of it feeling confident.
which is
Yeah.
so strange, right? Like, yeah, I don't really understand. Yeah, I don't understand how that happened. Also, I looked up the game. It's 86, Section 2, Game 3. If you guys want to do that game, and it's about a mining company. Yeah, mining company, and it goes from March to November. It's kind of annoying because you have a bunch of columns.
Yes. That game sucked.
Any game that's like this sucks.
Do you guys think the games going forward after April will still be the flex?
I think it'll still be the flex, but I think they might add in back the experimental.
Ugh, no.
Like, that's
I
like
don't know how they're gonna do that though, unless they give you guys bathroom breaks, so
What a bunch of assholes if they do that. Like, why?
I think they should just keep it out.
Right. Like,
no, they literally can't do that unless they decide to give you a bathroom break, because like, you have to take a break after 3 sections, so unless they decide that you can't cheat if you go to the bathroom, then, like, they're not gonna do they can't do that.
That's true. That's true. Maybe they
I
won't.
just don't understand the point of that extra section. Like, why torture everyone like
So
that?
all these tests right now that we're having, they're all experimental sections that were given before. So the
That's
flex is entirely built off of experimental sections or unreleased tests from before.
Right.
That's the experimental section, so you can use them later.
yeah. That's how they know the curve. Like, because if people took it before, they know in general how people do on that, and that's how they determine. Okay, like this is how many questions you can miss and get a 170.
Mm.
When you say -7, 8, or 6 or whatever, is that per section or is that on the whole test?
No, the whole test. So if I want to, so I'm shooting for a 170 next week. So that mean or 170 plus. So that means maximum I can probably get 7 wrong out of the entire test.
For the flex.
Wow.
Yeah, on the flex. On the actual test, like the regular version, it's more like 10, right?
Yeah, I think it's around 10.
Yeah.
Wow. What's a 160?
About 20 wrong.
Yeah.
Oh, that's not bad.
Another part about strategy, another thing about strategy for this exam, right, is if you like can really bank on one section, like, because it doesn't matter where the points come from, right? No college is ever gonna like, no law school is ever gonna get a report saying like this person sucked at logic games. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, if you can really build up, logic games is the easiest place to build up your score. So like, if you can get to a perfect score on logic games, you have so many more questions you can miss to still hit your goal score, whatever that might be.
Right. Like, I know reading comprehension is my worst section every single time. So I bank on getting everything right on logic games and maybe 2 or 3 wrong on logical reasoning. So I can cushion that for reading comprehension. I can still get 4 wrong and still get a 170 plus.
That makes sense. I'll be okay if I got in a 160 or 150 something. Like I don't think I would keep on taking it. I know a lot of people keep taking it, but I'm like, I don't think my brain can handle that. Just, you know.
Legit. Oh.
Do you guys have any other questions about this game before we answer other questions that we could have or talk about homework? Okay. In that case, then I'm going to switch to the PowerPoint so you guys can take a look at what homework is. And then if you have any other questions, like, feel free to ask. But we're going to send out another kind of drill later today or tomorrow. And then your specific games that we recommend that you do is PT 40, game 2. And then PT 26, game 1. But there's another list of games that if you want to take a picture of the screen, go ahead. But I'll put it either in the Slack. Actually, I'll just literally take a screenshot of this and put it in the Slack channel for you guys. And I'll send it out an email too. But these 2 highlighted games are the ones that we recommend.
The games that we got for homework over the last few weeks, like obviously some of them are easier than others, but like are any of them considered harder games at all that we've gotten?
No,
They're all considered 1 and 2 star.
So it's 7 stages ranking system, and I didn't give anything, like we didn't pick anything that was 3, 4, or 5 stars. And if it helps, some of those 3, 4, 5-star question or games are like that because of one question. That's like really, really hard, right? That's what bumps it up from 2 stars to 3 stars or 4 stars. So like, there can be one thing that makes a game much, much harder. But if you're able to spot that or like be okay with that or like understand that and move on, that's it. That's what makes a game harder. That's literally it. Sometimes it's just one thing.
That it's like a miscellaneous setup, like one of those weird setups that like rarely show up, which I think are showing up a little bit more often now. Because if you see like every flex, almost every single one of them had a weird game. So I think they're becoming a little bit more common. But every section is balanced really well. So in the earlier sections, you had like really weird games all the time, but they've moved away from that. So now you'll see something a lot more easy, like not easy, but easier, where you have like a good mix of 1 to 3 star games, and then one game that's usually like 4 or 5 stars. So the
But
next
those, you're
like
saying it's
4
not
hard.
based on like, you're saying those harder games are just based on like a question here and there, not necessarily based on like the diagramming or anything like that.
I could be the diagramming.
Yeah, the harder thing could be the diagramming, right? Another thing is like some games are just really hard because there's an inference that can be made, which most people can't make. Like it's just really hard to make that inference. But if you're able to get that inference, the game isn't hard in itself. Does that make sense? It's like it could be just one thing, but that you don't know what that one thing is, like while you're doing the game, obviously. And you don't even know if it's a hard game while you're doing it.
For
Yeah.
example, there's this one game. Most of you guys probably haven't looked at the 80s test yet, but I just took 88 again. And there's one game in there that everyone thinks is like notoriously difficult. And it's difficult because of the setup. But the questions are easy. Like there's one hard question because of substitution. But the real reason that game is hard because the setup is not normal and like nothing I've ever seen before. So that entire game is considered difficult because you have to make 2 crucial inferences. And if you don't make those inferences, you cannot solve this game. But yeah, there's different reasons why a game could be hard. It could be because of one inference, because of the setup, because of one question, different reasons. But the thing to remember is that they're never going to sit there and be like, oh yeah, let's really screw with them this time. Let's give them all 5-star games. That's never going to happen. So you don't have to worry about that if that's something you're concerned about.
Hey, Carson, I just have one last question. So if I'm going to like a 155, how many can I miss?
Okay. For 155, I'm pretty sure you can miss like 18, not 18. You can get like 7 wrong a section. I think you want to get like 18 right in each section. But the thing is, you're probably going to do better on games than you're going to do on other sections, just because
Right.
it's still to build up. So maybe bank on getting like 1 or none wrong on here, and then cushioning yourself for the other sections.
I'm okay at logic reasoning. It's reading comprehension that I just fucking suck. I mean, it's just, it's terrible. I got like every one of them. I think I got like 5 right. And I was like, well, so I got to definitely work on it.
For reading comp, it's a matter of like when people get a lot of questions wrong, it's because they didn't understand the passage. So like maybe find ways to understand the passage better, basically.
Yeah, and then on top of that, it's things that you just don't care about. You're like, what do I need to know this for? You know what I mean? Like, so I just gotta look at that differently because it's stuff that I don't care to read. So
Oh no, okay. If you go into the game, like the reading comprehension section, thinking I don't care about this, it's not going to go well for you because it's going to be a lot harder for you to stay checked in. And for me, the one way that I started changing my mindset for that is I don't love reading comprehension. I quite genuinely hate it. I despise it with like a hatred that I never thought I could be capable of. But I started going into it with like a mindset that, okay, I'm going to learn something cool about like, I don't know, bees or I don't know, about like a math concept or about space or something. I'm going to learn something new that I haven't learned before. And that's cool.
okay.
Take whatever brings you the tiniest little joy, take that to the extreme.
Okay.
Or if you can associate yourself, like put yourself in some part of the argument, right? Like if they're talking about being against something, like pretend you're against it too. I don't know.
Okay.
That can make it a little easier. Yeah.
It's hard to ask people to love reading comprehension, but it's not as hard to like something in it. Like one aspect of reading comprehension. You can probably find some aspect of it that you like a little bit.
I think the thing that helped me in reading comp, and like I'm not great at reading comp at all, like I've got a long way to go, but like what's helped me at least better understand the passage is like you guys had told us at one point, like in the last boot camp, like just literally before bed, literally just like read a passage from a previous like PT, and that's it. Like don't answer any questions, nothing else, just read a passage and then go to bed. Like be able to like understand what the passage says and then be done with it. And then eventually like go back to it and like actually answer it. But I think that's really helped me both in LR and in reading comp by a lot. So just a
I think that's
suggestion.
really smart. I started reading the New York Times articles and other like
Same.
newspapers that typically have like more complicated subjects. Like if you want to read like, I don't know, the Business Inquirer or something, go ahead. Signing yourself up for a subscription for some kind of article or some kind of newspaper that gives you more complicated subjects that you genuinely have to like read a lot to understand.
Mhm.
Some of these passages are literally pulled from those magazines.
Yeah.
Like I went after my, I think, November test, I found my article, one of my passages in the New York Times. They're literally in there. They
They come,
pull them from actual resources.
yeah, they all come from like academia or like journal articles or articles in the newspaper. They all come from places.
I don't know, maybe like pick a book that has a topic you're interested in, like nonfiction, like read nonfiction basically. Not like easy nonfiction, like read something that genuinely makes you think and genuinely like work that you have to like genuinely work through to understand. That's the kind of thing that you want to be reading. Like the more you get into practice of reading through these things and understanding what they're saying, the better you are set up for reading comprehension.
Also, very few people that I know like ran out of reading comp material. It's not like someone's here like running out of it. So because of that, if you want to like if you don't know what to read, read reading comp passages. Like that would help prepare you equally well, right? Read them, and then there's like websites online like LSAT hacks that have summaries or like the main ideas of those paragraphs and that passage. You can read it and then check your understanding with that, right? See if you actually understood the passage.
Which is also something you can do for games. Like what you can do is if you don't have homework help soon, if you're once you're done with boot camp, if you set up a game and you're not sure if it's the right setup, what you can do to get better at diagramming is set up your game and before you answer your questions, go online, go to 7 Sage, PowerScore, LSAT Demon, like Manhattan Prep, LSAT Hacks, whatever, and compare your diagram to their diagram. See if what you did makes sense. See if you like their way better and start understanding how they did it and how you can get to doing that. And the more and more you do that, the more and more you start thinking the way that other people do, and that becomes your own thinking too. Does anyone have any other questions for us?
And for homework, we got like two different types than the one that we saw today, because the one that we saw today was grouping and sequence at the same time. So for homework, you guys have one that's in and out in sequence. And then double sequence is like two things being sequenced at the same time, which I kind of think is a little bit hybrid-ish. So I just stuck it in there.
You guys had mentioned study guides the last class.
Mhm.
Are you guys like giving out study guides, or how do we go about getting a study guide after the boot camp is over?
Yeah, basically we could tell you like how to make a good study plan, and then we're going to give. I have an Excel spreadsheet that I give the students that I'm tutoring, and I'll give you guys all access to that if you guys would like to use that. And then we'll talk about how like our each individual, like what we did to improve our scores, like because there's many different ways that people learn and many different methods that you can use, and it depends on you guys' like learning style, preferences, timeline, how much time you have to dedicate to studying every day, and based on those, you can like pick one of those. You'll have access to the LSAT the spreadsheet as well to put in information as you like go through games.
Okay, because I'm using the LSAT trainer and I think I'm gonna skip up on it. It's just the way he writes, it's a lot of first person narrative, and I feel like I'm reading a comic book.
That's funny. I've never heard it being described that way. It feels like you're reading a comic book.
It's like a Spider-Man book sometimes. I can't do it anymore.
I've never read the LSAT trainer, so I can't speak to it, but we will definitely have a time when we talk about our own study plans. Like I think next Saturday is when we're talking about it. So I'll pop in for a little bit that day to talk about my study plan and then dip out again. But we'll make sure that we talk to you about how to efficiently study and how you can inefficiently study, so you don't do that either.
All right, thank you guys. Good night.
Yeah.
Bye. If no one else has any other questions, you're all totally free to go.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.